Martha Thompson's weathered hands trembled as she placed the worn military dog tag on the small granite marker, the metal catching the late afternoon sun. Behind her, Robert stood silent, his Vietnam veteran's cap clutched against his chest, while their granddaughter Lily sobbed quietly into her hands. The inscription blurred through Martha's tears. Ranger, K95472. He found us when we were lost. 5 years earlier, they'd discovered him bloodied and broken on that rainy country road, just another abandoned military dog used up and discarded after his service. They never imagined how he would repay their kindness. "Some souls find each other across impossible distances," Martha whispered, remembering the night Ranger had refused to leave Lily's bedside, frantically pawing at her neck where doctors would later find the cancer that would have taken her life. They thought they had rescued him. Instead, he had saved them all. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Thompsons had never planned on being dog people. Their modest two-story home in suburban Richmond had stood empty of pets since their old tabby cat passed away 3 years ago. Martha had insisted they were too old to take on the responsibility again. "We're in our 60s, Robert," she'd say. "We need freedom, not more obligations." But life had a way of rearranging their careful plans. At 63, Martha's hands now bore the slight tremor of early arthritis, a souvenir from 3 decades of teaching elementary school children. She'd retired 2 years ago, around the same time they lost their son David in Afghanistan. The grief had carved new lines into her face, turning her once bright blue eyes into pools of quiet sorrow. She filled her days with pottery classes and tending to her garden, but nothing could fill the David-shaped hole in her heart. Robert, at 65, still carried himself with the straight-backed discipline of his military days, though his limp had worsened over the years. Vietnam had left him with more than just physical scars. The nightmares still came, less frequently now, but no less intense. After 30 years in construction, he'd reluctantly retired when his knees could no longer handle the strain, though he still picked up odd jobs to supplement their increasingly stretched retirement fund. They'd purchased the small farm in the Shenandoah Valley 5 years ago, 10 acres with a weathered farmhouse and a creek running through the back property. It was supposed to be their retirement dream, a place to grow old together in peace. Instead, it had become their sanctuary after David's death, and now the weekend home for their granddaughter Lily. At 8 years old, Lily was all gangly limbs and curious eyes, with her father's dimpled smile and stubborn chin. Her mother, Sarah, had taken a job as a traveling nurse after David's death, the military benefits barely covering their existing medical debts. "It's just temporary," Sarah had promised when she'd asked the Thompsons to watch Lily on weekends and school holidays. That had been 18 months ago. "I don't mind," Martha had whispered to Robert late one night as they listened to Lily's soft breathing from the guest room. "Having her here, it's like having a piece of David back with us." What Martha would never say aloud was how the silence pressed in when Lily wasn't there. How the house seemed to echo with memories of phone calls never to be answered again, of holidays with an empty chair. Robert understood without her having to explain. He'd seen too many empty chairs in his lifetime. Their retirement savings had dwindled faster than expected. Robert's VA benefits helped, but Martha had started selling her pottery at local craft fairs to make ends meet. They'd never expected to be raising a child again at their age, never expected to be mourning a son instead of celebrating his homecoming. But as Robert often said in his quiet moments, the Lord doesn't give us what we expect. He gives us what we need to become who we're meant to be. Neither of them could have known how prophetic those words would prove to be. It was the kind of spring afternoon that Virginia does best. Warm sunshine filtering through new green leaves, the scent of wildflowers carried on a gentle breeze. Martha sat in the passenger seat of their aging Ford pickup, watching the countryside roll by as Robert navigated the winding back roads toward their farm. In the middle seat, Lily was uncharacteristically quiet, her face pressed against the window, small fingers tracing the path of raindrops from an earlier shower. "Look at those dogwoods," Martha said, trying to lift the mood. "They're putting on quite a show this year." Lily nodded without enthusiasm. The end of the school year was approaching, and with it came the annual father-daughter dance. The event had cast a shadow over her normally bright spirit for days. "You know," Robert began carefully, "I was thinking I could take you to that dance, Lily girl." "If you wanted an old grandpa for an escort." Martha gave him a grateful smile, but Lily just shrugged, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape. "Maybe," she murmured, the single word hanging in the air between them. Martha exchanged a worried glance with Robert. They'd both noticed Lily withdrawing more lately, as though her father's absence was becoming more real, rather than less, with the passage of time. Sarah called it delayed grief, something the child psychologist had warned them about. The truck slowed as they approached a particularly bad stretch of road where recent rains had carved deep ruts into the gravel. Robert leaned forward, focusing on navigating the rough terrain, when Lily suddenly pressed her face closer to the glass. "Grandpa, stop!" she cried. "Stop the truck!" Robert braked instinctively, his arm shooting out across Lily's chest in protective reflex. "What is it, honey?" "What's wrong?" "There's something on the side of the road." Lily was already unbuckling her seatbelt. "I think it's hurt." "Lily, wait!" Martha called, but the girl had already thrown open the door and was scrambling down from the high seat. Robert muttered something under his breath as he put the truck in park and switched on the hazard lights. "That child is going to give me a heart attack one of these days." By the time Martha managed to get her door open and ease herself down from the passenger seat, Lily was already kneeling in the mud at the roadside. As Martha approached, she saw what had caught her granddaughter's attention. A large dog lay motionless on the ground, its coat so matted with mud and what appeared to be blood that it was difficult to make out its coloring. "Oh, Lord," Martha breathed, her hand going to her throat. The animal looked dead, but as she drew closer, she saw its rib cage rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. "He's hurt really bad, Grandma," Lily said, her voice steady in a way that surprised Martha. The girl wasn't crying or panicking. Instead, she had a look of intense concentration as she knelt beside the wounded animal. "We have to help him." Robert approached more cautiously, his limp more pronounced as he navigated the uneven ground. "Now, Lily, we don't know anything about this dog. Could be dangerous, could have rabies. Best thing might be to call animal control when we get to the farm." "He'll die by then," Lily said with absolute certainty, her small hand hovering just above the dog's head, not quite touching. "Look at him, Grandpa. He needs help now." Martha moved closer, trying to assess the animal without getting too near. It was a German shepherd, she realized. A big one, though terribly thin beneath the mud and blood. One of its front legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and a deep gash ran along its side. Despite its grievous injuries, the dog's eyes were open, watching them with an unnerving intelligence. "Robert," Martha said softly, "I think Lily's right. This poor creature won't last until animal control gets here." Robert sighed, rubbing his hand across his jaw. "Martha, we can't just—" His words cut off as the dog made a feeble attempt to raise its head, a soft whine escaping its throat. Something about that sound seemed to resolve something in Robert's expression. "All right," he said, resignation in his voice. "But we're being careful about this. I'll get the old blanket from behind the seat." As Robert limped back to the truck, Martha knelt beside Lily, careful to keep her distance from the injured animal. "Don't touch him yet, sweetheart. He's hurt and scared, and even the gentlest dog might bite when they're in pain." Lily nodded, but her eyes never left the dog's face. "He's not going to hurt us, Grandma. He's just really tired and sad." The certainty in her voice sent a strange chill down Martha's spine. Before she could respond, Robert returned with a faded plaid blanket, the one they kept in the truck for impromptu picnics or emergency breakdowns. "Stand back now," he instructed, unfolding the blanket. With surprising gentleness, he spoke to the dog. "Easy now, fella. We're going to try to help you, but you got to work with me here." As Robert carefully slid the blanket under the animal, Martha noticed something half buried in the mud and matted fur around its neck. She leaned closer, squinting. "Robert," she said, "I think there's some kind of tag or collar." Using the corner of the blanket, she carefully wiped away some of the mud. The metal tag was military issue, she realized with a start. Etched into the surface was K9 5472, and beneath it a single word, Ranger. "It's a military dog," she breathed, memories of David's letters home about the K9 units in Afghanistan flashing through her mind. "Robert, this is a service dog." Something in Robert's posture changed, a stiffening that Martha recognized from their early years together, when certain sounds or smells would catapult him back to the jungles of Vietnam. "All the more reason to be careful," he muttered, but his hands were even gentler as he wrapped the blanket around the injured animal. The dog, Ranger, made no move to resist as Robert carefully lifted him. He was surprisingly light for his size, evidence of malnourishment. Martha hurried ahead to open the tailgate of the truck, and Robert laid the bundled dog in the truck bed as gently as if he were handling fine china. "I'm riding back here with him," Lily announced, already climbing up. "Absolutely not," Robert began, but Martha laid a hand on his arm. "Let her sit in the cab with the window open so she can see him," she suggested quietly. "That way she's safe, but can still keep an eye on him." After a moment's hesitation, Robert nodded. "Fine, but we're driving slow, and straight to Doc Watson's place instead of the farm. If anyone around here would know what to do with a military working dog, it'd be him." As they settled back into the truck, Martha couldn't help but notice how Lily positioned herself by the rear window, her small palm pressed against the glass, as if she could somehow transfer her strength to the wounded animal through the barrier. "You think Doc will be home?" Martha asked as Robert carefully turned the truck around. The retired veterinarian lived in a small house at the edge of town, rarely venturing out these days since his wife's passing. "He'd better be," Robert said grimly, glancing in the rearview mirror at the bundle in their truck bed. "Because I don't think this dog has a lot of time to spare." The drive to Doc Watson's took nearly 30 minutes, each bump in the road eliciting a concerned gasp from Lily. Robert drove with uncharacteristic care, slowing to a crawl over the rougher patches. No one spoke much. The gravity of their cargo seemed to demand silence. As they pulled into the gravel driveway of a small white clapboard house, Martha was relieved to see smoke rising from the chimney. At least someone was home. "Stay in the truck," Robert told Lily firmly as he switched off the engine. "Let me talk to Doc first." Martha watched as her husband made his way up the worn path to the front door, his limp more pronounced after the tension of the drive. Before he could knock, the door swung open, revealing a tall, thin man with a shock of white hair. Eleanor Wilson was not what anyone would expect. Despite her name, Doc was a woman in her 70s, her face weathered by years in the sun, her eyes sharp and assessing beneath bushy white eyebrows. She'd been the town's veterinarian for decades before retiring, though most locals still brought their animals to her rather than driving the extra 20 miles to the nearest official clinic. "Robert Thompson," Eleanor said, her voice as raspy as fallen leaves. "Must be something serious to bring you to my doorstep on a Sunday afternoon." Martha couldn't hear Robert's reply, but she watched as Eleanor's gaze shifted to the truck, her expression changing in an instant. Without waiting for Robert to finish speaking, she was already moving past him, grabbing a worn medical bag from just inside her door. "Bring him inside," she called, already heading toward the truck. "Quickly now." Martha turned to Lily. "Stay close to me, sweetheart. Let Doc do her work." Together they climbed out of the truck as Eleanor reached the tailgate. The older woman carefully pulled back the edge of the blanket, her expression unreadable as she assessed the injured animal. "Military working dog," she said quietly, more to herself than to them. "Belgian Malinois mix, probably. Seen action, from the look of him." "The tag says Ranger," Martha offered. "Can you help him?" Eleanor's eyes, when they met Martha's, held something Martha couldn't quite name. Recognition, perhaps, or something deeper. "Bring him inside," she repeated, already turning toward the house. "There's not much time." Eleanor's home smelled of dried herbs and antiseptic, an unusual combination that somehow seemed fitting for the enigmatic woman. Robert struggled under Ranger's weight as he carried the wounded animal through the narrow hallway into what should have been a dining room but had been converted into a makeshift veterinary clinic. A sturdy metal examination table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by shelves packed with medical supplies and jars of mysterious substances. "Put him here," Eleanor directed, clearing the table with a sweep of her arm. "Martha, there's clean towels in that cabinet. Lily, sweetheart, you can help by filling that basin with warm water from the tap." Martha was struck by how Eleanor had remembered their names without introduction. Had Robert mentioned them? She couldn't recall. As Robert gently laid Ranger on the table, the dog let out a pitiful whine that made Lily's eyes fill with tears. Eleanor immediately began cutting away the blanket with practiced efficiency, her gnarled hands moving with surprising dexterity. "What happened to him?" she asked, not looking up from her work. "Found him on the side of Crestview Road," Robert explained. "Looks like he might have been hit by a car." Eleanor made a non-committal sound as she carefully examined the dog's broken leg. "This isn't from a car accident," she said after a moment. "This break is older, a week, maybe more. It started healing wrong." She continued her examination, gently palpating Ranger's ribs and abdomen, checking his eyes, ears, and mouth with practiced precision. The dog remained unnervingly still, his amber eyes following her movements with an intelligence that seemed almost human. "He's malnourished, dehydrated, got some infected wounds on his flank, and that leg needs to be reset," Eleanor finally announced. "But that's not what concerns me most." She carefully turned Ranger's head, revealing a nasty gash behind his ear. "This is a bullet graze. Someone shot at this dog." Martha gasped, instinctively moving closer to Lily, who had returned with the basin of water. "Shot?" Robert's voice had taken on a hard edge Martha recognized from his rare discussions of Vietnam. "Why would someone shoot a military dog?" Eleanor's weathered face was grim. "That's the question, isn't it?" She carefully wiped mud from around Ranger's neck, revealing the military tag more clearly. Her fingers traced the numbers etched into the metal, and something in her expression shifted. "K95472, she read aloud. Then, almost to herself, "Ranger." "Do you know this dog?" Martha asked, noticing the flicker of recognition in the older woman's eyes. Eleanor didn't answer immediately, instead turning to a cabinet and removing several bottles and a syringe. "I'm going to sedate him so I can clean these wounds properly and set that leg," she said, neatly sidestepping the question. "This will take some time. There's coffee in the kitchen if you want to wait, or you can come back later." "We'll wait," Lily said immediately, her small face set with determination. "He needs to know we didn't leave him." Eleanor's stern features softened slightly. "You've got a good heart, child." She glanced at Martha and Robert. "She reminds me of someone." Before Martha could ask who, Eleanor turned back to her patient. "I need to work now. Kitchen's through there." They retreated to Eleanor's kitchen, a surprisingly cozy space with a wood-burning stove and shelves lined with preserves. Robert lowered himself into a chair at the small table, wincing as his bad knee protested. "Robert?" Martha said quietly once Lily had become absorbed in looking at the collection of bird feathers displayed on the windowsill. "How did she know our names?" "Did you introduce us?" Robert frowned. "No, I just told her we found an injured dog." He shrugged. "Maybe she knows us from town. It's a small community." Martha wasn't satisfied with that explanation, but before she could press further, Lily joined them at the table. "Is Ranger going to die?" she asked bluntly, with the directness only children can manage. Martha exchanged a glance with Robert. "Doc Eleanor is very good at what she does," she answered carefully. "She's going to do everything she can to help him." "He can't die," Lily said with surprising fierceness. "He has something important to do." "What do you mean, sweetie?" Martha asked, momentarily taken aback by her granddaughter's intensity. Lily shrugged, suddenly looking like a normal 8-year-old again. "I don't know. I just know he's not supposed to die yet." The certainty in her voice sent another of those strange chills down Martha's spine. They waited in silence for nearly an hour, Lily eventually falling asleep with her head on Martha's lap. Robert paced the small kitchen despite his bad knee, occasionally peering down the hallway toward the makeshift exam room. "What are we going to do with him if he survives?" he finally asked, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Lily. Martha sighed. "I don't know. We can't just leave him." "We're not exactly set up for a dog, Martha, especially not one that's been—" He hesitated. "One that might have issues." Martha understood what he wasn't saying. A military dog that had seen combat, been wounded, abandoned, and shot at, would likely have the canine equivalent of PTSD, something Robert knew all too well. "We'll figure it out," she said simply, stroking Lily's hair. "One step at a time." It was nearly dusk when Eleanor finally appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked exhausted, but there was a satisfied set to her mouth that gave Martha hope. "He'll live," Eleanor announced without preamble. "I've set the leg, cleaned and stitched the wounds, started him on antibiotics and fluids. He's tough, this one." Lily, who had awakened at Eleanor's entrance, let out a small cheer. "Can we see him?" she asked eagerly. Eleanor nodded. Briefly, he's still heavily sedated. They followed her back to the exam room, where Ranger lay on the table, now covered with a clean blanket. His injured leg was splinted and wrapped, and several shaved patches on his body revealed neat rows of stitches. An IV drip ran into a vein in his foreleg. "He looks better already," Martha observed, relieved to see the steady rise and fall of the dog's chest. "Appearances can be deceiving," Eleanor replied. "He's got a long recovery ahead. That leg will need surgery eventually to heal properly." "I've done what I can, but I'm working with limited resources here." "What about a proper animal hospital?" Robert asked. "We could take him to Charlottesville tomorrow." Eleanor shook her head. "He's not stable enough for transport yet. And—" she hesitated. "There might be complications with taking a military working dog to a civilian facility. They're technically government property." "Property?" Lily's voice was indignant. "Ranger's not a thing. He's a hero." Eleanor smiled slightly. "You're right about that, child." She turned to Robert and Martha, her expression serious again. "There's something you should know about this dog. Military working dogs, especially those who've served in combat zones, aren't like regular pets. They're trained differently, experience things most dogs never do. This one," she gestured to Ranger, "this one has seen things, done things. It changes them, just like it changes the soldiers they work with." Robert's face had gone carefully blank, a sign Martha recognized from whenever his own war experiences were referenced. "I've seen combat dogs before," he said stiffly, "in Vietnam." Something flashed in Eleanor's eyes. Recognition, perhaps. "Then you understand what I'm saying. This dog may have behaviors, reactions that could be challenging." "Are you saying he's dangerous?" Martha asked, instinctively drawing Lily closer. All dogs with his training have the potential to be dangerous, Eleanor answered frankly. But that's not what concerns me most. Look at this. She gently turned Ranger's head to reveal his ear, where a series of numbers had been tattooed. This identifies him as part of a specialized unit, she explained. These dogs are extremely valuable to the military. They don't just abandon them. Someone either stole this dog or something happened that forced him to run. Maybe his person died, Lily suggested quietly. Maybe he's looking for a new family. Eleanor gave the child a long look. Maybe, she conceded. Either way, you have a decision to make. He needs constant care for at least the next few weeks. I can keep him here for a day or two. But after that, we'll take him, Lily said immediately. Lily, Robert began, a warning note in his voice. Please, Grandpa, she pleaded. We have to help him. It's important. Martha watched her husband's face, seeing the internal struggle play out in his features. She knew what it cost him to even consider bringing a military dog into their home, how it would dredge up memories he'd spent decades trying to bury. We need to think about this, he said finally. It's not a simple decision. Why don't you sleep on it? Eleanor suggested. He won't be ready to move for at least 48 hours anyway. Come back tomorrow, and we'll see how he's doing. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor pulled Martha aside while Robert helped a reluctant Lily into her jacket. That child has a special connection with this dog already, she said quietly. I've seen it before. Some people just have a way with animals, an instinct. Your granddaughter has it. She's always loved animals, Martha agreed. Gets it from her father. He was the same way. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. Her father? Our son, David. He was killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Afghanistan, she repeated softly. When exactly? Martha frowned, puzzled by the question. October 2021. Why? But Eleanor had already turned away, moving to check Ranger's IV. No reason? Just curious. You should go now. It's getting dark, and the roads can be treacherous at night. The drive home was subdued, Lily eventually falling asleep against Martha's shoulder. Robert drove in silence, his jaw set in the way that told Martha his thoughts were troubled. What are you thinking? She finally asked softly. Robert sighed. That dog is going to bring complications we don't need, Martha. Military dogs don't just turn up on country roads. Something's not right about this situation. I know, she agreed, but you saw how Lily was with him. I haven't seen her that present in months. Robert was quiet for a long moment. I had a bad experience with a military dog in Nam, he finally said, his voice so low Martha had to strain to hear it. Never told you about it. K9 unit was attached to our patrol. Dog went after me one night. Would have torn my throat out if his handler hadn't been there. Martha reached across to squeeze his arm. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Never seemed important to mention. He shrugged. But bringing a combat-trained dog into our home, around Lily, it makes me nervous. Eleanor said he'd need constant care, Martha pointed out. We could just help until he's recovered, then find him a more suitable home. Robert shot her a knowing look. You think Lily's going to let him go once she's nursed him back to health? That child has her father's stubborn streak. Martha couldn't argue with that. David had been relentlessly determined from the time he could walk. Lily was cut from the same cloth. They pulled into their farmhouse driveway just as full darkness settled over the valley. Robert carried the still sleeping Lily into the house while Martha turned down beds and set out toothbrushes. Later, after Lily was tucked in and Robert had gone to secure the doors, Martha found herself standing at the kitchen window, looking out into the darkness. Somewhere out there, A wounded soldier of a different species was fighting for his life. And somehow, Martha felt certain their lives had become entangled with his in ways they couldn't yet understand. The weeks that followed brought changes to the Thompson household that none of them could have anticipated. After 3 days under Eleanor's care, Ranger was deemed stable enough to be moved. The decision to bring him home hadn't really been a decision at all. Lily's unwavering determination had simply worn down Robert's resistance until he'd thrown up his hands and muttered, "Fine, but he's staying in the mudroom until we know he's safe." Ranger didn't stay in the mudroom. By the end of his first day at the farmhouse, he had somehow managed, despite his splinted leg and weakened condition, to drag himself to Lily's bedroom door, where Martha found him whining softly around midnight. "He wants to protect her," Robert had observed reluctantly, watching as the dog settled on the braided rug beside Lily's bed with a deep sigh of contentment. "That's what he's trained to do, protect his person." Martha had noticed how Robert avoided using military terminology like handler or unit, speaking of Ranger as if he were just an ordinary dog. She understood it was his way of maintaining emotional distance. That distance proved impossible to sustain. Ranger, for all his military background and mysterious past, was a dog of extraordinary intelligence and surprisingly gentle disposition. As his strength returned, his personality emerged. Watchful, but not aggressive, alert, but not anxious, and utterly devoted to Lily. "I've never seen anything like it," Eleanor commented during one of her regular visits to check on Ranger's recovery. "It's as if he's imprinted on her." Usually, military dogs have that kind of bond only with their assigned handlers. Martha had caught the slight emphasis on assigned, but chose not to press. Eleanor remained frustratingly cryptic about how she knew so much about military working dogs, deflecting questions with the skill of a seasoned politician. By the 3rd week, Ranger's improvement was remarkable. The infected wounds had healed cleanly, and he'd gained weight, his coat regaining its luster with proper nutrition. The broken leg remained a concern. Eleanor had fashioned a better splint, but she continued to insist he would eventually need surgery. "The bones haven't aligned properly," she explained, showing Martha the slight deformity visible even through the bandages. "He can walk on it, but he'll always have pain and weakness without proper surgical repair." The cost of such surgery was prohibitive. Estimates from the veterinary hospital in Charlottesville had made Martha's stomach churn. Their savings were already stretched thin, and with Lily's school expenses and the farm's upkeep, there simply wasn't room in their budget for an $8,000 procedure. Robert, to Martha's surprise, had been the one to suggest dipping into their emergency fund. "We can't let him suffer," he'd said gruffly when Martha questioned him. "Not after everything he's been through." Martha suspected Robert's newfound attachment to Ranger had something to do with the nightmares. They had decreased significantly since the dog's arrival, as if Ranger's presence somehow kept the jungle ghosts at bay. More than once, she'd awakened to find Robert sitting on the porch in the pre-dawn hours, Ranger, a silent sentinel beside him, the two of them seeming to understand each other in ways that required no words. Lily, meanwhile, had blossomed. The withdrawn child of just a month ago had been replaced by a vibrant, chattering girl who spent hours teaching Ranger commands and tricks, reading to him from her school books, and including him in elaborate games of pretend. When Sarah called for their weekly video chat, she had been astonished by the transformation. "Mom, she's smiling again," she'd said, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Really smiling, not just that polite face she puts on for everyone." Martha had simply nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The grief that had wrapped around their family like a shroud since David's death seemed to have loosened its grip, at least for Lily. As for herself and Robert, well, it was something to see their granddaughter happy again. A start. It was Robert who first noticed Ranger's unusual behavior around strangers. The mail carrier, a friendly woman who'd been delivering to their farm for years, had backed away nervously when Ranger positioned himself between her and Lily, his posture alert but not aggressive. "He's assessing," Robert had explained later, surprising Martha with his insight. "Military dogs are trained to evaluate potential threats. He's not being aggressive, he's doing his job." "His job?" Martha had asked. Robert had shrugged, uncomfortable with the slip. "You know what I mean. His training." But Martha had caught the flicker of recognition in her husband's eyes, the growing understanding of what Ranger was and what he had been trained to do. Their investigation into Ranger's origins had hit multiple dead ends. Robert's contacts at the local VA office couldn't find any record of a canine unit missing a dog, and calls to military bases within a 200-mile radius had yielded nothing but bureaucratic runarounds. The Department of Defense website listed a procedure for reporting found military working dogs, but their submission had gone unanswered. "It's like he doesn't exist," Robert had said, frustrated, after another fruitless phone call. "Or someone doesn't want him found." Martha had noticed him checking the locks more carefully at night after that realization, his old vigilance returning. Eleanor remained their most valuable resource, though her knowledge came parceled with enigmatic statements and unfinished thoughts. She visited weekly, bringing special supplements for Ranger and occasionally slipping Lily candies when she thought Martha wasn't looking. "His training was expensive," she remarked one afternoon as they watched Ranger follow a complex series of hand signals from Lily with perfect precision. "These dogs cost more to train than it takes to put a student through medical school. Someone, somewhere, is missing him." "Then why hasn't anyone come looking?" Martha asked. Eleanor's weathered face had remained impassive. "Maybe they have." The comment had lingered in Martha's mind for days afterward, adding to her growing sense that there was more to Ranger's story than a simple case of abandonment. 6 weeks after Ranger's arrival, they had their first real scare. Robert had taken Lily into town for ice cream, leaving Martha alone at the farmhouse with the Ranger. She'd been weeding her vegetable garden, Ranger dozing in the shade nearby, when she noticed a black SUV with government plates driving slowly past their property. Something in the deliberate pace of the vehicle raised the hairs on the back of her neck. Ranger had noticed it too. He was on his feet instantly, a low growl rumbling in his chest, eyes fixed on the vehicle. Martha had never seen him display aggression before, and the transformation was startling. His entire body seemed to vibrate with tension, his ears forward, tail rigid. The SUV had continued down the road without stopping, but Ranger remained on alert for hours afterward, refusing to return to the house until Robert and Lily returned. That night, Martha had found Robert checking the shotgun he kept locked in their bedroom closet, making sure it was loaded. "Just being cautious," he'd said when he caught her watching. The incident might have been dismissed as paranoia if not for Eleanor's reaction when Martha mentioned it during her next visit. Black SUV, government plates? The older woman's perpetual composure had slipped, revealing a flash of something that looked remarkably like fear. "Did they stop? Did anyone approach the house?" "No, they just drove by slowly," Martha had replied, increasingly alarmed by Eleanor's intensity. "Eleanor, what's going on? Who might be looking for Ranger?" Eleanor had composed herself quickly. "Probably nothing. Routine patrol, maybe." But she'd cut her visit short that day, and before leaving had pressed a small piece of paper into Martha's hand. "If they come back," she'd said quietly, "call this number immediately. Don't wait, don't question, just call." Martha had tucked the paper into her wallet without looking at it, the sense of playing a part in something larger and more dangerous than a simple dog rescue growing stronger by the day. Despite these undercurrents of tension, life with Ranger quickly established its own rhythm. He accompanied Lily everywhere the weather permitted, his protective instinct never wavering. As his strength returned, He revealed an almost preternatural ability to anticipate needs, fetching Robert's slippers before he asked, alerting Martha when the kettle was about to boil, herding Lily away from the creek when the water ran high after spring rains. "It's not just training," Robert observed one evening as they watched Ranger gently guide Lily away from a patch of poison ivy she hadn't noticed. "This dog understands things most humans don't." Martha had simply nodded, remembering her son's letters about the almost mystical bond between military handlers and their dogs. David had written about a canine unit attached to his squad, how the dog had warned them of an ambush seconds before it happened, saving dozens of lives. Had Ranger performed similar life-saving feats in Afghanistan? The thought both comforted and disturbed her. The turning point in Robert's relationship with Ranger came unexpectedly, during a violent thunderstorm that rattled the windows of their farmhouse and sent jagged bolts of lightning cutting across the valley. Martha had awakened to find Robert gone from their bed, the familiar cold dread settling in her stomach. His nightmares were always worst during storms, the thunder too similar to artillery fire, the flashes of lightning mimicking explosions. She'd found them on the porch, Robert huddled on the swing, his body rigid with remembered terror, and Ranger pressed firmly against his side, head resting on Robert's knee. As another thunderclap shook the house, Robert's hand had tightened in Ranger's fur, and the dog had responded by pressing closer, a living anchor to the present moment. Martha had quietly retreated, knowing her presence would only embarrass Robert. In the morning, neither she nor Robert mentioned the incident, but something had shifted. Robert began including Ranger in his daily routines, taking him along on walks to check the property boundaries, allowing him to ride in the truck during errands, even sharing bits of bacon from his breakfast plate when he thought Martha wasn't looking. "He understands," Robert said simply when Martha finally commented on the change. "Not the details, but the feeling. He's been there too." 8 weeks after Ranger's arrival, Sarah called with unexpected news. She'd been offered a permanent position at the hospital in Richmond with regular hours and better pay. She would be moving back by the end of the month. "We'll get a place close to you," she'd assured Martha. "Lily can stay in the same school, and I'll need help with childcare anyway." The news should have been cause for celebration, but Martha had found herself watching Lily and Ranger with a strange sadness. The little girl lay on the living room rug, one arm thrown over the dog's broad back as she read aloud from Charlotte's Web, Ranger's eyes following her finger across the page as if he understood every word. "What will happen to him when they move?" Martha asked Robert that night. "Sarah's never been a dog person, and who knows if her new place will even allow pets, especially one his size." Robert had been uncharacteristically optimistic. "We'll figure it out. Maybe they can visit on weekends. Or maybe—" he hesitated. "Maybe he could stay here with us." Martha had stared at her husband in astonishment. "You'd want to keep him? After everything you said about military dogs?" Robert had shrugged, embarrassed by his own change of heart. "He's a good dog, Martha, and he deserves a good home after what he's been through." Their plans, like so many before, were destined to change in ways they couldn't have anticipated. The first sign came so subtly that Martha nearly missed it. She'd been brushing Ranger on the back porch, a weekly ritual that the dog seemed to enjoy as much for the attention as for the grooming, when she noticed him repeatedly turning to nose at Lily's neck and jaw as the girl sat beside them reading. "Stop it, Ranger," Lily giggled, pushing his muzzle away. "That tickles." But the dog was persistent, whining softly as he nudged the same spot again and again. "Let me see, sweetheart," Martha said, setting aside the brush and tilting Lily's head. "Did you get scratched or something?" There was nothing visible on the skin, no redness or marks that might explain Ranger's fixation. Martha ran her fingers gently along Lily's jawline and down the side of her neck, feeling nothing unusual until she reached the spot just above the collarbone. There, beneath the skin, she felt a small, firm lump about the size of a pea. "Does that hurt?" she asked, pressing gently. Lily shook her head. "I can't even feel anything." Martha might have dismissed it as a swollen lymph node from a minor infection if not for Ranger's continued distress. The dog wouldn't leave Lily alone, nosing at the spot with such insistence that Martha finally called Eleanor for advice. "Bring her over," Eleanor said after listening to Martha's description. "I want to take a look." "You're not a people doctor," Martha reminded her, though she was already reaching for her car keys. "No," Eleanor agreed, "but I know when something's not right. And if Ranger's that concerned, there's usually a reason." Eleanor's examination was brief but thorough. She felt the lymph nodes on both sides of Lily's neck, checked her temperature, looked down her throat, and finally sat back with a frown. "The lump is probably nothing," she said carefully. "Children get swollen lymph nodes all the time from minor infections. But, Martha prompted when Eleanor didn't continue. "But I've seen dogs detect illness before symptoms are obvious to humans," Eleanor finished. "Their sense of smell is thousands of times more sensitive than ours. They can detect chemical changes we can't begin to perceive." "What are you saying?" Eleanor sighed. "I'm saying you should take Lily to her pediatrician. Today, if possible. It's probably nothing, but I believe in listening when animals try to tell us something." Robert had been skeptical but unwilling to take chances where Lily was concerned. They'd called Sarah, who had arranged for an emergency appointment with Lily's doctor in Richmond that same afternoon. Dr. Freeman, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked dark hair, had listened patiently to Martha's explanation, her expression neutral as Martha described Ranger's behavior. "I know it sounds crazy," Martha finished lamely, but the dog was insistent. To her surprise, Dr. Freeman hadn't dismissed her concerns. "Actually, there's growing research on dogs' ability to detect certain medical conditions," she said, turning to examine Lily. "Some hospitals are even using specially trained dogs to screen for certain cancers. It's not as far-fetched as it sounds." The word cancer had sent a cold shock through Martha's body, though the doctor had been quick to reassure her that she was simply being thorough. After examining the lump, Dr. Freeman had ordered blood work and an ultrasound just to be on the safe side. "It's almost certainly a reactive lymph node," she'd explained. "Children get them all the time from minor infections, even ones they don't show symptoms for, but I never ignore a concern no matter where it comes from." The ultrasound had revealed abnormalities that prompted further tests. By the end of the week, Lily was scheduled for a biopsy of the lymph node and surrounding tissue. Through it all, Ranger had remained unusually subdued, as if sensing the gravity of what he had set in motion. "What if it's serious?" Martha had whispered to Robert the night before the biopsy, her voice breaking. "We can't lose her too, Robert. Not after David." Robert had held her close, his own fear evident in the tremor of his hands. "We won't," he'd promised, with a conviction Martha knew he couldn't possibly feel. "We found it early, whatever it is, because of Ranger." The day of the biopsy, Ranger had refused to eat, pacing anxiously by the door until they left for the hospital. Sarah met them there, her face tight with worry as she hugged Lily close. "Mom said Ranger found it," she'd said to Martha while Lily was being prepped. "Is that true?" Martha had nodded. "He wouldn't leave her alone. Kept nosing at that exact spot until I checked." Sarah had looked away, blinking rapidly. "David always said those military dogs were special." I didn't really believe him. The procedure itself was quick, performed under light sedation that left Lily groggy, but not unconscious. As they waited for her to fully wake in the recovery area, Dr. Freeman had approached with another physician, an older man with kind eyes and a grave expression. "This is Dr. Patel, our pediatric oncologist," Dr. Freeman had introduced him, and Martha had felt the floor tilt beneath her feet at the word oncologist. "We won't know for certain until the pathology comes back," Dr. Patel had explained gently. "But the appearance of the tissue during the biopsy is concerning for thyroid cancer. It's extremely rare in children, which is why we want to move quickly with additional tests." The world had narrowed to a tunnel of white noise around Martha as the doctor continued explaining the next steps: more imaging, blood tests, possible treatment options. She'd been vaguely aware of Robert's hand gripping hers so tightly it hurt, of Sarah's muffled sob, of the cool plastic chair someone had guided her into when her legs threatened to give way. Cancer. The word echoed in her mind, terrible and final. The same disease that had taken her mother, her sister. And now it was threatening Lily. "How could we have missed this?" Sarah had asked later, her voice hollow with shock. "She hasn't had any symptoms." "Nothing. That's actually common with thyroid cancer," Dr. Patel had explained. "It's often called the silent disease because symptoms may not appear until it's quite advanced. You're very fortunate to have caught it so early." Fortunate. The word had seemed obscene in the moment. And yet, as the initial shock receded, Martha had found herself thinking of Ranger, of his persistent nudging, his whining distress. Without him, they might not have discovered the cancer until it had spread beyond the thyroid, beyond treatment. That night, returning to the farmhouse without Lily, who was staying with Sarah in Richmond for the additional tests scheduled for the following day, Martha had found Ranger waiting by the door. The dog's posture had been alert, expectant, his eyes searching behind them for Lily. "She's not with us, boy," Robert had said softly, kneeling despite his bad knee to wrap his arms around the dog's neck. "But you did good. You did real good." As if understanding, Ranger had pressed his head against Robert's chest, a soft whine escaping his throat. Later, lying awake in the darkness, Martha had turned to find Robert also sleepless, staring at the ceiling. "Do you think he knew?" she'd asked quietly. "Not just that something was wrong, but what it was?" Robert had been silent for a long moment. "Eleanor said military dogs are trained to detect all sorts of things. Explosives, drugs, people. Maybe some of them can detect disease, too. But how would Ranger have that training?" Robert had sighed heavily. "I don't know, Martha, but I'm starting to think there's a lot more to that dog's story than we know." As if summoned by their conversation, a soft whine had sounded at their bedroom door. Robert had risen without hesitation to let Ranger in, and the dog had settled on the floor between their sides of the bed, his head resting on his paws, eyes gleaming in the darkness. Guardian, protector, savior. The words had floated through Martha's mind as she'd finally drifted into uneasy sleep. Ranger's steady presence a small comfort against the terrifying unknown that lay ahead. The hospital waiting room had become a second home to the Thompsons over the following weeks. The biopsy confirmed what Dr. Patel had suspected: papillary thyroid carcinoma, a rare but highly treatable form of cancer, especially when caught early. The treatment plan was aggressive but promising: surgery to remove the thyroid gland, followed by radioactive iodine therapy to destroy any remaining cancer cells. "She's lucky," Dr. Patel had explained during one of their many consultations. "Most cases in children aren't discovered until the cancer has spread to the lymph nodes or lungs. Lily's is still contained to the thyroid itself." Lucky. The word stuck in Martha's throat like a fishbone. Was it luck that had brought a half-dead military dog to their doorstep? A dog with the uncanny ability to detect a disease that might otherwise have gone unnoticed for months or even years? The coincidence seemed too great, the timing too perfect. Robert had taken to calling Ranger the guardian angel, though only in private, his gruff voice softening whenever he spoke of the dog who had, in all likelihood, saved their granddaughter's life. David always believed things happened for a reason, he'd told Martha one night as they drove home from the hospital. Said even the worst days in Afghanistan had purpose, though he couldn't always see it. Martha had nodded, remembering her son's unwavering faith even in the darkest circumstances. "Do you think this was his doing somehow? Sending Ranger to us?" Robert had kept his eyes on the road, but she'd seen the muscle in his jaw working. "I don't know about all that, but I do know that dog found us for a reason. And I'm not one to question miracles when they come." It was a statement that would have been unthinkable from her pragmatic husband just months before. The man who had once insisted on rational explanations for everything now spoke of miracles and purpose with quiet conviction. It was just one of many changes Ranger had wrought in their lives. Sarah had moved back to Richmond as planned, taking a small apartment just 10 minutes from the Thompsons' suburban home. The proximity allowed them to share Lily's care during her treatments, with the girl splitting her time between her mother's apartment and her grandparents' house. By unspoken agreement, Ranger remained with the Thompsons, though he traveled with them whenever Lily was present. The financial strain of Lily's treatment was significant, even with Sarah's improved insurance coverage. There were deductibles, co-pays, and numerous expenses that insurance didn't cover: special foods during radiation treatment, gas for the constant trips to the hospital, overnight stays when treatments ran late. Martha had sold most of her better pottery pieces and taken a part-time job teaching art at the community center, while Robert had increased his handyman work despite his worsening knee pain. Pride had prevented them from accepting financial help initially, but the community had found ways around their reluctance. Casseroles appeared on their doorstep with alarming regularity. The church ladies organized a silent auction featuring Martha's pottery. Robert's former construction colleagues showed up one weekend and replaced their aging roof without asking permission. Even Eleanor contributed, bringing homemade remedies to ease Lily's post-treatment nausea and refusing payment for Ranger's ongoing care. Through it all, Ranger remained a constant, steady presence. He seemed to understand intrinsically when Lily needed gentle companionship and when she needed distraction, when to lie quietly beside her, and when to engage her in play. During her worst days after radiation treatment, when even the sight of food made her ill, he would lay his head on her lap, his amber eyes never leaving her face, as if willing his strength into her small body. The hospital staff had bent rules to allow Ranger to visit Lily during her longer stays, impressed by his impeccable behavior and the visible improvement in Lily's spirits whenever he was present. Dr. Patel had even mentioned a study being conducted on canines' ability to detect certain cancers, suggesting Ranger might be a candidate for the research program. "Dogs like him are rare," he'd explained to Martha. "The ability to detect disease isn't just about their superior sense of smell, it's about their willingness to alert humans to what they perceive. Not all dogs make that connection." Martha had promised to consider it, though the thought of Ranger in a research setting made her uneasy. He had already given them so much. It seemed wrong somehow to ask more of him. It was during one of Lily's hospital stays, nearly 3 months after her diagnosis, that the confrontation they had subconsciously been dreading finally occurred. Martha had been sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, giving Sarah some private time with Lily, when she noticed a man in military uniform watching her from across the room. He was in his 40s, she guessed, with close-cropped dark hair and the lean, hard build of someone accustomed to physical demands. When he rose and approached her table, Martha felt a jolt of recognition, though she was certain they had never met. There was something in his measured stride, in the watchful assessment of his gaze, that reminded her forcefully of Ranger. "Mrs. Thompson?" he said. stopping precisely 3 feet from her table. "I'm Staff Sergeant Michael Collins, U.S. Army Special Forces. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Martha's heart hammered against her ribs, but years of teaching elementary school had taught her to maintain composure in crisis. "You'd better sit down, Sergeant Collins," she said evenly, gesturing to the chair across from her. He hesitated, then complied, his posture remaining rigidly formal even in the molded plastic chair. "I'm here about a military working dog," he continued without preamble. "Belgian Malinois mix, answers to Ranger, service number K95472. "How did you find us?" Martha asked, buying time while her mind raced. "That's not important," Collins replied. "What matters is that Ranger is military property, and I'm here to reclaim him." "Property?" Martha heard the echo of Lily's indignant voice. "Is that what you call a living creature who feels pain and loyalty and love?" Something flickered in Collins's eyes, discomfort, perhaps, or doubt. "Ma'am, I understand you've grown attached to the dog, but he was never meant to be a pet. He's a highly trained military asset with specialized skills that are needed for ongoing operations." "Skills like detecting cancer in an 8-year-old girl?" Martha countered, watching his reaction carefully. Collins blinked, the only break in his disciplined demeanor. "I'm not sure what you mean." Martha leaned forward. "Ranger found a cancerous tumor in my granddaughter's thyroid, stage 1, completely asymptomatic. The doctors say if it hadn't been caught for another few months, it would have spread to her lymph nodes and possibly her lungs. That dog saved her life." Collins was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Ranger was part of a specialized detection unit," he finally said, his voice softer. "We trained for explosives primarily, but there was experimental training in medical detection as well." "It wasn't his main function." "Well, it's his function now," Martha said firmly. "My granddaughter is upstairs undergoing treatment for the cancer he found. He's been by her side through surgery, radiation, everything. She needs him. And the Army needs him, Mrs. Thompson. I'm sorry about your granddaughter, truly I am, but Ranger isn't just any dog. He's one of the most successful military working dogs in recent history. Over 3 tours in Afghanistan, he saved countless lives, including mine." Collins's voice had taken on a fervent quality. "Do you understand what I'm saying? He's not just valuable. He's irreplaceable." Martha studied the man across from her, seeing beyond the rigid military bearing to the desperation in his eyes. "They told us his handler was killed in action," she said quietly. "That's why he wasn't reassigned." Collins's composure cracked visibly at that. "Is that what they said?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I wasn't killed. I was wounded, badly enough that they shipped me stateside and told Ranger I was dead. He wouldn't work with another handler, kept trying to find me, so they wrote him off as unstable and scheduled him for euthanasia." The clinical brutality of it stunned Martha into momentary silence. They were going to put him down just because he was loyal to you? "Military working dogs are tools, Mrs. Thompson, not pets," Collins repeated, though the words sounded hollow now. "When a tool stops functioning as intended, it's replaced." "He's not a tool," Martha snapped, anger rising hot in her chest. "He's a living being who served his country with honor and deserved better than to be discarded and almost killed because he grieved for you." Collins looked away, a muscle working in his jaw. "Someone obviously agreed with you because he disappeared from the base before the procedure could be carried out. I've been looking for him ever since I was well enough to search." "How long?" 18 months. His gaze returned to hers, steady and determined. "I'm not leaving without him, Mrs. Thompson." Martha felt cold dread settling in her stomach. She had no legal claim to Ranger. Even the veterinary care had been registered under Eleanor's name to avoid potential complications. If Collins insisted on taking him, There would be little they could do to stop him. "At least come and see him first," she found herself saying. "See what he's doing for Lily. Then decide if you still want to take him away from her." Collins hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "I'll see him. But I should warn you, the bond between a handler and his dog isn't easily broken. When Ranger sees me—" He left the sentence unfinished, but Martha understood the implication. Ranger might choose his original handler over the family who had rescued him, regardless of how attached he seemed to Lily. "Robert and I will bring him to the hospital tomorrow morning," she said, rising from the table on legs that felt surprisingly steady given the turmoil inside her. "Lily has treatment at 10. You can meet us in the garden courtyard at 9:30. Collins stood as well, military precision in every movement. "I'll be there." He hesitated, then added more gently, "I am sorry about your granddaughter, Mrs. Thompson. I hope her treatment is successful." "It will be," Martha replied with more confidence than she felt. "Ranger won't leave her until she's well. I believe that, even if you don't." She walked away without looking back, waiting until she was alone in the elevator before allowing the tears to come. How would she tell Lily that Ranger might be taken away? How would the child bear another loss after everything she'd been through? Robert was waiting in Lily's room when Martha returned, his expression changing instantly when he saw her face. "What's happened?" he asked, rising to meet her. Martha shook her head slightly, glancing meaningfully at Lily, who was dozing with Sarah beside her. "Later," she murmured, squeezing his hand in silent communication. It wasn't until they were driving home that evening, leaving Lily with Sarah for the night, that Martha recounted her meeting with Collins. Robert listened in grim silence, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "He can't just take him," he said when she finished. "Ranger's part of our family now." "Legally he can," Martha countered softly. "Ranger is still technically military property, regardless of how he came to us." "Property," Robert spat the word. "Is that all they see? After everything that dog gave them?" Martha placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Collins is coming to see Ranger tomorrow at the hospital. Maybe when he sees how things are, maybe he'll understand." Robert shook his head. "Military men follow orders, Martha. Trust me on this." "Collins didn't seem like he was following anyone's orders but his own," Martha mused. "He said he's been searching for Ranger for 18 months, ever since he recovered from his injuries. This isn't official military business. It's personal for him." "Which might make it worse," Robert pointed out. "A man doesn't search for 18 months for something he's willing to walk away from." When they arrived home, Ranger greeted them at the door with his usual dignified enthusiasm, tail wagging slightly, ears alert for any sign of Lily behind them. His disappointment was palpable when he realized she wasn't with them. "She's staying with her mom tonight, boy," Robert explained as he always did, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "We'll see her tomorrow." Martha watched the interaction with a heavy heart. What would happen tomorrow when Ranger saw his original handler? Would the bond of years and shared combat override these months of gentle companionship? And what would it do to Lily to lose him now, when she needed him most? "We should call Eleanor," she said suddenly. "She knows more about this situation than she's letting on. Maybe she can help." Robert nodded, already reaching for his phone. "Been thinking the same thing myself." Eleanor answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for their call. She listened without interruption as Martha explained the situation, then sighed heavily. "I was afraid this might happen," she admitted. "Collins has been searching for Ranger since he recovered enough to leave the hospital. He's persistent." "You knew?" Martha couldn't keep the accusation from her voice. "You knew all along who Ranger was and where he came from?" "I suspected," Eleanor corrected. "I couldn't be certain until I saw the dog and his tags. Michael Collins is my grandson, Mrs. Thompson. But we've been estranged for years, his choice, not mine. I knew he had a military working dog, knew he'd been injured, but the details, those I had to piece together. Why didn't you tell us? Robert demanded. Would it have changed anything? Eleanor countered. Would you have turned Ranger away if you'd known his handler might come looking for him one day? Martha and Robert exchanged glances, both knowing the answer. They would have made the same choices, regardless of the risk. What do we do now? Martha asked, the fight gone from her voice. Colin says he's not leaving without Ranger. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Bring Ranger to the hospital tomorrow as planned, she finally said. Let him see Michael. Let Michael see what Ranger has become to your family, especially to Lily. The rest, well, even I can't predict what will happen when those two are reunited. And if Collins insists on taking him, then you have a choice to make, Eleanor said simply. Fight for Ranger through legal channels, which you would almost certainly lose, or trust that what's meant to be will find a way. It wasn't the clear direction Martha had hoped for, but she recognized the wisdom in Eleanor's words. Some things couldn't be controlled or predicted, only witnessed and accepted. That night, for the first time since he'd come to them, Ranger slept on the bed between Martha and Robert, his solid warmth a comfort against the uncertainty that lay ahead. Martha stroked his head in the darkness, memorizing the feel of his fur beneath her fingers, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Whatever happens tomorrow, she whispered to him, know that you saved us in more ways than one, and we will always, always love you for it. Ranger sighed deeply, pressing closer against her side as if understanding the weight of her words. Morning came too quickly, the pale spring sunlight seeming to mock their somber mood as they prepared for the day ahead. Martha had barely slept, her mind churning with scenarios and arguments, ways to convince Collins to leave Ranger with them, at least until Lily's treatment was complete. We'll offer to pay, Robert had suggested around dawn, both of them lying awake. Whatever the military paid for his training, we'll match it. Martha had smiled sadly at her husband's determination, knowing they couldn't possibly afford even a fraction of what Ranger's specialized training had cost, but she appreciated his willingness to try. Ranger seemed to sense their anxiety, staying closer than usual as they moved through their morning routine, his amber eyes tracking their movements with unusual intensity. When Martha knelt to attach his service vest, the one that identified him as a therapy dog and allowed him hospital access, he licked her cheek once, the gesture so uncharacteristically demonstrative that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "You know, don't you?" she whispered, pressing her forehead briefly against his. "You always know." The drive to the hospital passed in tense silence, each of them lost in private thoughts. Ranger sat alertly in the back seat, his posture becoming increasingly rigid as they neared the hospital, as if he sensed the significance of this particular visit. The garden courtyard was empty when they arrived, the spring flowers nodding in a gentle breeze, the decorative fountain creating a peaceful backdrop of running water. Martha checked her watch, 9:20. They were early. "I'll stay with Ranger," Robert offered. "You go up and check on Lily, make sure she's ready for treatment." Martha nodded, grateful for the reprieve, however brief. As she turned to leave, she found herself unable to resist giving Ranger one more embrace, burying her face in his thick fur for a moment before straightening and walking away without looking back. Sarah and Lily were already in the treatment waiting area, Lily listlessly paging through a dog magazine, her face pale but composed. She brightened visibly when she saw Martha. "Is Ranger here?" she asked immediately. "Grandpa has him in the garden," Martha answered, forcing a smile. "He'll come up for your treatment like always." She caught Sarah's questioning look and gave a small shake of her head, not wanting to discuss Collins in front of Lily. Whatever happened, the child didn't need the additional stress of anticipating a possible loss. "I'm going to get some coffee," Sarah said, understanding immediately. "Do you want to come with me, Mom?" Martha nodded gratefully. "We'll be right back, sweetheart," she told Lily. "Don't go anywhere, okay?" Once they were alone in the hallway, Martha quickly explained the situation. Sarah's face drained of color as she listened. "They can't take him," she said when Martha finished. "Not now. Lily depends on him. The doctors even say her recovery is progressing faster than expected because of his support." "I know," Martha said heavily, "but legally we don't have a leg to stand on. Ranger is still military property, regardless of how he came to us." Sarah shook her head, a familiar, stubborn set to her jaw that reminded Martha painfully of David. "There has to be something we can do. Some way to fight this." "Maybe there won't be a fight," Martha said, trying to sound more hopeful than she felt. "Maybe when Collins sees how important Ranger is to Lily, he'll reconsider." Sarah's expression was skeptical, but she nodded. "I'll stay with Lily. You go back and, deal with this Collins person." Martha squeezed her daughter-in-law's hand in silent gratitude before heading back toward the elevator. As the doors closed, she found herself offering a silent prayer, something she hadn't done regularly since David's death had shaken her faith to its core. "Please," she thought fervently. "Please don't take him from us. Not yet." The elevator doors opened onto the hospital's ground floor, and Martha steeled herself for the confrontation ahead. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would change their lives irrevocably. All she could do was face it with the same courage Ranger had shown throughout his extraordinary life. With dignity, loyalty, and an open heart, Martha spotted them immediately as she stepped into the garden courtyard, Robert seated on a bench near the fountain, Ranger at perfect attention by his side, and facing them, a tall figure in military uniform. Staff Sergeant Michael Collins stood with parade ground posture, his back to Martha, seemingly frozen in place as he stared at the dog he'd been searching for over 18 months. What struck Martha most was Ranger's reaction, or rather, his lack of one. The dog remained seated beside Robert, alert but calm, showing none of the frantic joy she had expected at seeing his former handler. His amber eyes were fixed on Collins with unmistakable recognition, but he made no move to approach the man. "He won't come to me," Collins was saying as Martha drew closer, his voice tight with emotion. "I've given him the recall command 3 times. Robert's face was a careful mask. "Maybe he doesn't remember." Collins shook his head, a quick, decisive movement. "He remembers. Look at his posture, his focus. He knows exactly who I am." "Then why doesn't he come?" Martha asked, announcing her presence. Collins turned, and Martha was struck by the raw vulnerability in his face, so at odds with the disciplined military bearing of his body. "Because something's changed," he said quietly. "He's changed." Martha took a seat beside Robert, noting how Ranger shifted slightly to maintain contact with her leg. The simple gesture of loyalty brought a lump to her throat. "Tell me what happened," she said to Collins. "The real story, not the official version. How did Ranger end up abandoned on a country road in Virginia?" Collins's jaw worked for a moment before he spoke. "We were on our 3rd tour in Afghanistan. Routine patrol turned into an ambush. I took shrapnel to the chest and head, went down hard." His voice had taken on the flat affect Martha recognized from Robert's rare discussions of Vietnam, the tone of someone deliberately distancing themselves from trauma. "Ranger stayed with me, wouldn't leave even when the rest of the unit had to fall back temporarily. By the time they fought their way back to extract us, I was unconscious, barely alive. They had to sedate him to get him on the medevac chopper." Collins paused, swallowing hard. "I spent 4 months in a coma. When I woke up, they told me Ranger had become unstable, refusing to work with other handlers, showing aggressive behavior. Standard protocol for a military working dog that can't be reassigned, is euthanasia. Martha felt Robert stiffen beside her. They were going to put him down for being loyal to you? That's the military way, Collins replied, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. Efficiency above all. A dog that won't work is a liability, not an asset. So how did he escape? Martha pressed. Collins' gaze shifted away from them, out toward the distant trees. I can't say for certain. Records indicate he was being transported to the facility where the procedure would take place when the transport vehicle was involved in a minor accident. Somehow, during the confusion, Ranger's kennel was opened and he disappeared. Something in his careful phrasing caught Martha's attention. You helped him escape, didn't you? Collins met her eyes then, a flash of defiance in his gaze. I had friends in the unit who knew what Ranger meant to me, knew what he'd done. Let's just say not everyone agreed with the decision to euthanize a dog with 3 combat tours and multiple commendations. And you've been looking for him ever since, Robert concluded. As soon as I was well enough to leave the hospital. Collins nodded. It took months of physical therapy before I could even walk properly again. By then the trail was cold, but I never stopped searching. Martha studied the man before them, his scarred hands, the faint line that disappeared into his hairline where shrapnel had marked him, the intensity in his eyes when he looked at Ranger. This was a man who had nearly died in service to his country, who had fought his way back from devastating injuries, who had never abandoned his search for the partner who had saved his life. How could she possibly ask him to walk away now? Sergeant Collins, she began, her voice gentle, I understand what Ranger means to you. But there's something you need to know, something beyond what I told you yesterday. She explained about Lily's cancer, about Ranger's extraordinary behavior that had led to the early diagnosis, about the bond that had formed between the child and the dog during her treatment. Collins listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. The doctors say her prognosis is good, Martha concluded, but the treatment is brutal, especially for a child her age. Ranger has been her rock through all of it. I don't know if she could bear losing him now, on top of everything else she's endured. Collins was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to Ranger, who had remained steadfastly by Robert's side throughout the conversation. I need to see her, he finally said. I need to see them together. It wasn't the response Martha had expected, but she nodded, relief washing through her that he hadn't immediately insisted on taking Ranger. She's upstairs waiting for her treatment. Ranger always goes with her. They've made an exception for him in the oncology department. Then let's go upstairs, Collins said simply. The elevator ride was tense, the 4 of them, 3 humans and 1 dog, standing in awkward silence as they ascended to the oncology floor. Martha noticed how Collins kept glancing down at Ranger, a mixture of pride and bewilderment in his expression. He looks good, he said softly. Healthy. The last time I saw him. He trailed off, but Martha could fill in the blanks. The last time Collins had seen Ranger, the dog had likely been as traumatized as his handler, covered in blood, perhaps both his own and Collins', and frantic with protective instinct. He was in rough shape when we found him, Robert acknowledged. Broken leg, infected wounds, half-starved. Took weeks of care before he started looking like himself again. Collins nodded, his throat working as he swallowed whatever emotion threatened to break through his composure. The doors opened onto the oncology floor, its walls painted in cheerful colors that couldn't quite disguise the serious nature of the work done there. Ranger's demeanor changed instantly, his posture somehow both more alert and more gentle, his pace measured as he walked beside Robert, clearly familiar with the protocol here. They found Lily and Sarah in the waiting area, Lily slumped tiredly against her mother's side. The child straightened immediately when she spotted Ranger, her face lighting up in a way that never failed to catch at Martha's heart. "Ranger!" she called, her voice stronger than it had been just moments before. The transformation in the dog was remarkable. His entire body seemed to soften, his tail lifting in a gentle wag as he moved forward to greet Lily, pushing his nose gently against her outstretched hand. "I missed you," Lily told him earnestly, wrapping her thin arms around his neck. "Are you going to stay with me during treatment again?" "Doctor Patel says I only need 3 more sessions and then we can go home for a whole month before they check me again." Martha watched Collins's face as he witnessed the interaction, seeing the conflict written plainly in his features, the longing for his partner battling with the recognition of what that partner had become to this fragile child. "Lily," Martha said gently, "there's someone here who knew Ranger before we did. This is Sergeant Collins." Lily looked up, noticing Collins for the first time. Her eyes widened at his uniform. "Are you a soldier like my dad was?" Collins' composure faltered visibly at the innocent question. "Yes," he managed. "I am. Your dad was in the military too?" Lily nodded solemnly. "He was a soldier in Afghanistan. He died there 3 years ago. Grandma says he's a hero." "I'm sure he was," Collins said softly. "I'm very sorry about your dad." Sarah had risen to her feet, her protective instinct evident in the way she positioned herself slightly in front of Lily. "You're Ranger's original handler," she said. "Not a question, but a statement." Collins nodded. "Yes, ma'am. And you've come to take him back." Her voice was flat, challenging. Before Collins could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Lily Thompson, we're ready for you now." Lily stood, one hand automatically reaching for Ranger's vest. "Come on, boy. Time for the scary chair again." Martha watched as Collins's gaze followed the pair, the small, fragile child and the powerful dog padding protectively beside her. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his rigid posture. "Ma'am," he addressed Sarah formally, "I'd like your permission to observe Lily's treatment. I want to understand exactly what Ranger does here." Sarah hesitated, looking to Martha for guidance. Martha gave a small nod and Sarah relented. "All right, but please don't upset her. This is hard enough as it is." The treatment room was designed to be as comforting as possible, with murals of forests and wildlife on the walls and comfortable recliners instead of clinical beds. Lily settled into her usual chair, Ranger automatically positioning himself where he could rest his head on her lap once the IV was in place. The nurse, familiar with their routine, worked around Ranger with practiced ease. "Your buddy's here again, huh?" she said cheerfully to Lily as she prepared the IV. "He's the best therapy dog we've ever had in this ward." "He's not really a therapy dog," Lily corrected her seriously. "He's a military dog. He worked with soldiers like my dad." The nurse's eyes flicked briefly to Collins, noting his uniform, but she continued her work without comment. Once the IV was established and the medication was flowing, she stepped back. "All set, sweetheart. The usual 45 minutes and then we'll disconnect you. Press the button if you need anything." As the door closed behind her, leaving them in the quiet hum of the treatment room, Collins moved closer to observe. Ranger had already settled into his position, his head resting gently on Lily's lap, his eyes fixed on her face with unwavering attention. "Does he always stay like that?" Collins asked softly. Lily nodded. "The whole time. Sometimes it makes me sleepy, and I fall asleep with my hand on his head. And when I wake up, he hasn't moved at all." She stroked Ranger's ears gently. "Grandma says he's protecting me from the inside, fighting the bad cells that try to hurt me." Martha saw the impact of those innocent words on Collins, the slight flinch, the tightening around his eyes. Protecting from threats was exactly what Ranger had been trained to do. Only now, instead of explosives or enemy combatants, he was helping a child fight an invisible enemy within her own body. Now, he's very good at protecting, Collins said, his voice rough. That's what he was trained for. Did you train him? Lily asked, curious despite her fatigue. Collins nodded. Since he was about a year old, we worked together for 5 years. He must have really loved you, Lily observed. Grandma says he got lost after you were hurt. Collins swallowed hard. I think he was trying to find me, he admitted. We were separated after I was injured. Lily considered this seriously. And now you found him again. Are you happy? Such a simple question, but Martha could see it cut straight to Collins's core. Yes, he said after a moment. I'm very happy to see that he's safe and doing such important work. Are you going to take him away? Lily asked directly, her small face suddenly anxious. Because I still need him. The doctors say I'm getting better, but sometimes it's really hard and scary, and Ranger helps me be brave. The naked vulnerability in her question hung in the air between them. Collins looked stricken, his military bearing crumbling in the face of this child's simple plea. Lily, Sarah interjected gently, Ranger actually belongs to Sergeant Collins. He's been looking for him for a very long time. Lily's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. But I need him, she whispered. He's my best friend. Ranger, sensing her distress, pushed himself up higher, licking a tear from her cheek. The gesture of comfort was so gentle, so at odds with the powerful military working dog he had been trained to be, that Martha felt her own eyes fill with tears. Collins watched the interaction with an unreadable expression. Then, to Martha's surprise, he knelt beside Lily's chair, bringing himself to her eye level. Ranger was my best friend, too, he said quietly. He saved my life more times than I can count. When I was hurt very badly, he stayed with me, protected me, even though it was dangerous. That's the kind of dog he is. Loyal, brave, protective. Lily nodded, still stroking Ranger's fur. He found my cancer, she said simply. The doctor said it was really small and hidden, but he knew it was there. He kept poking at my neck until Grandma checked and found the bump. That doesn't surprise me, Collins said with a sad smile. He was always the best detection dog in our unit. Better than the machines, even. They fell silent then, the only sounds the soft beeping of the IV machine and Ranger's steady breathing. Martha watched Collins watching Lily and Ranger, seeing the conflict written plainly on his face. Whatever decision he was wrestling with, she knew it was tearing him apart. The treatment continued, Lily eventually dozing off as the medication took effect, her small hand resting on Ranger's head. Collins remained nearby, his gaze never leaving the pair, something like resignation slowly settling into his features. When the nurse returned to disconnect the IV, Collins stepped outside, motioning for Martha and Robert to join him in the hallway. Sarah remained with Lily, who was still sleeping. I can't take him, Collins said without preamble, his voice low and rough with emotion. Not now, not when she needs him like this. Relief flooded through Martha so intensely that for a moment she couldn't speak. Robert reached out to shake Collins's hand, his own emotion evident in the gruffness of his voice. Thank you. We know what this costs you. Collins accepted the handshake with military precision. I'm not giving him up, he clarified. I'm just postponing our reunion until the girl is better. Of course, Martha agreed quickly. We wouldn't expect anything else. Collins ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, a gesture of uncharacteristic uncertainty. I'm stationed at Fort Belvoir now, about 2 hours from here. I'd like to visit from time to time, check on his progress, if that's acceptable. More than acceptable, Martha assured him. You're welcome anytime. Ranger is still your dog. We've just been taking care of him for you. A ghost of a smile touched Collins' mouth. I'm not sure he's mine anymore, he said quietly. Did you see how he didn't respond to my recall command? That's never happened before. Never. Maybe he knew something we didn't, Robert suggested. Dogs have instincts we can't begin to understand. Collins nodded slowly. In Afghanistan, there were times he'd refuse a command because he'd detected danger I couldn't perceive. I learned to trust his judgment even when it contradicted my own. He glanced back toward the treatment room. Maybe this is the same thing. Maybe he knew he was needed here more than with me. The raw honesty in his voice touched Martha deeply. This was a man accustomed to control, to having his commands obeyed without question. Yet here he was, accepting that his partner of 5 years, the dog he'd searched for across 18 months, had chosen a different path. "Will you get in trouble?" she asked suddenly. "For not bringing him back to the military?" Colin's expression closed slightly. Officially, Ranger was listed as killed in action after his disappearance. Reinstating him would involve paperwork and questions I'd rather avoid. It's better for everyone if he remains unofficially retired. Martha understood what he wasn't saying, that he was potentially risking his career by allowing Ranger to stay with them. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing no words could adequately express their gratitude. Collins straightened, military bearing reasserting itself. "I should go. I have a long drive back to base." He hesitated, then added, "Please tell Lily that I'm honored to know Ranger is helping her." That's what he was trained for, to protect and serve. "We'll tell her," Martha promised. "And please come visit whenever you can. I know Ranger would appreciate seeing you." Collins nodded once, sharply, then turned and walked away, his back straight, his stride measured. Only the slight clenching of his fists betrayed the emotion he kept so rigidly contained. "That," Robert said quietly as they watched him disappear into the elevator, "is one hell of a soldier. And one hell of a human being," Martha added softly. When they returned to the treatment room, Lily was awake, pale and tired as she always was after the procedure. Ranger remained pressed against her side, a solid presence of comfort and stability. "Where did the soldier man go?" Lily asked, noticing Collins's absence. Martha sat beside her, choosing her words carefully. "He had to return to his base, but he wanted me to tell you something important. He said he's very proud that Ranger is helping you, because that's what Ranger was trained to do, protect people and help them." "Is he coming back to take Ranger away?" The anxiety in Lily's voice was palpable. "No, sweetheart," Martha assured her. "Ranger is staying with us until you're all better. Sergeant Collins understands that you need him right now." Relief washed over Lily's face. "Good," she said simply. "Because Ranger still has work to do. He told me so." Martha exchanged a glance with Robert, both of them long past questioning Lily's unusual connection with the dog. If she said Ranger had more work to do, they believed her. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Martha found herself watching Ranger with new eyes, seeing not just the gentle companion who had become part of their family, but the highly trained military working dog who had served his country with distinction, who had saved lives in combat zones, who had demonstrated loyalty beyond measure to both his original handler and his new family. What extraordinary circumstances had brought him to them that rainy spring day? What twist of fate had placed him on that specific road at that specific time, where Lily's insistence on stopping had changed all their lives? Martha didn't have answers to these questions, but as she watched Ranger walking protectively beside Lily toward the hospital exit, she found she didn't need them. Some miracles, she was learning, didn't require explanation, only gratitude. The fragile peace that settled over the Thompson family in the weeks following Collins's visit felt like a reprieve, tentative but precious. Lily continued her treatments with Ranger faithfully by her side, the hospital staff now treating the dog as an unofficial member of their oncology team. Several of the doctors had even begun documenting Ranger's behavior in their notes, fascinated by his apparent ability to detect subtle changes in Lily's condition, sometimes before their advanced medical equipment could. He always knows when I'm going to have a bad day, Lily explained matter-of-factly to Dr. Patel during a checkup. He stays extra close and won't leave my side, even to eat. That's how Grandma knows to give me the special medicine before I start feeling sick. Dr. Patel had exchanged a thoughtful glance with Martha. There are studies about dogs detecting changes in body chemistry, he'd said later, when Lily was out of earshot. Nothing conclusive yet, but what Ranger does, it's remarkable. I've been in oncology for 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like it. Martha had simply nodded, having long since accepted that there were aspects of Ranger's abilities that defied conventional explanation. The dog who had once detected improvised explosive devices in the dust of Afghanistan now used those same extraordinary senses to monitor the invisible battle raging inside Lily's small body. The parallel wasn't lost on Martha. Ranger was still saving lives, just in a different kind of war zone. True to his word, Staff Sergeant Collins began visiting regularly. His first few appearances had been stiff, formal affairs, the soldier clearly uncomfortable in the domestic setting of the Thompson home. But gradually, as weeks turned into months, his military bearing softened around the edges. He would bring treats for Ranger that Martha suspected weren't available in civilian pet stores, and occasionally small gifts for Lily, a smooth stone from a river in Afghanistan, a pressed flower from a rare peaceful moment during his deployment, stories about Ranger's heroic acts carefully edited for a child's ears. "He saved our entire unit once," Collins told Lily one Sunday afternoon as they sat on the farmhouse porch. "We were patrolling a village when Ranger suddenly stopped and refused to go forward. Wouldn't move no matter what command I gave. Turned out there was a pressure plate IED buried in the path ahead. Would have taken out half our squad if he hadn't detected it." Lily had listened wide-eyed, her small hand resting protectively on Ranger's head. "He's a hero," she'd declared with absolute certainty. "Yes, he is," Collins had agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "One of the best." Martha had noticed how, during these visits, Ranger would acknowledge Collins with respectful attention, but always maintained his position near Lily. There was no rejection in his behavior. He would accept Collins' commands and even demonstrate some of his military training when asked, but it was clear his primary loyalty now lay with the child. For his part, Collins seemed to have accepted this realignment of allegiance with a grace that impressed Martha deeply. "He's found his new mission," he'd said simply when she'd tried to apologize for Ranger's divided attention. "That's what these dogs live for. Purpose, a job to do. Lily's giving him that now." It was during one of Collins' visits, nearly 6 months after Ranger had first come into their lives, that the next crisis struck. They'd been enjoying a rare good day, Lily's energy higher than usual between treatment cycles, the spring weather perfect for an outdoor lunch at the farmhouse. Sarah had joined them, bringing a homemade chocolate cake to celebrate Lily's latest scan results, which showed significant tumor reduction. "To our little fighter," Robert had toasted, raising his iced tea glass toward Lily, who had beamed with pride. They were just clearing the lunch dishes when Robert suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain, the glass he'd been holding shattered on the porch floorboards as he staggered sideways, collapsing against the railing. "Robert!" Martha's scream seemed to come from somewhere outside herself as she lunged toward her husband. His face had gone gray, his breathing shallow and labored. "Call 911!" she shouted to Sarah, who was already fumbling for her phone. Everything after that became a blur of frantic activity. The paramedics arriving, Robert being loaded into the ambulance, oxygen mask over his face. Martha climbing in beside him, her entire body numb with terror. Sarah promising to bring Lily and Ranger to the hospital later after the initial crisis had passed. The diagnosis came swiftly. Myocardial infarction, a heart attack. Significant but not immediately life-threatening thanks to the quick response. Robert was whisked into surgery for an emergency stent placement, leaving Martha alone in yet another hospital waiting room, her mind cycling between prayer and panic. "He'll be okay, Mom," Sarah assured her, arriving an hour later with Lily and Ranger in tow. The hospital had made a special exception to allow the dog entry, given his status as Lily's therapy animal and the extraordinary circumstances. "The doctor said they caught it quickly," Martha replied automatically, though the words brought little comfort. She couldn't stop seeing Robert's face contorted in pain, couldn't stop hearing the fear in his voice as he'd gasped her name before losing consciousness in the ambulance. Ranger, sensing her distress, pressed against Martha's legs, offering the same steadfast comfort he had provided Lily throughout her treatments. She buried her fingers in his thick fur, drawing strength from his solid presence. "He's going to be okay, Grandma," Lily said with the same certainty she'd shown about Ranger's recovery months earlier. "Ranger says so." Martha managed a weak smile, unwilling to challenge her granddaughter's faith, though her own felt fragile at best. How much more could their family endure? First David's death, then Lily's cancer, and now Robert's heart attack. It seemed a cruel pattern of loss and threat, a relentless assault on their small family unit. The surgery lasted 4 hours. When the cardiologist finally emerged, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "We've placed 2 stents to open the blocked arteries," he explained. "Mr. Thompson responded well to the procedure. He's stable now, though he'll need to remain in the ICU for at least 48 hours for close monitoring." Relief made Martha's knees buckle. Sarah caught her arm, steadying her as the doctor continued outlining the recovery process, the lifestyle changes Robert would need to make, the cardiac rehabilitation that would follow. "Can we see him?" Martha asked when he finished. Briefly, the doctor nodded. "He's still heavily sedated but conscious. 2 visitors at a time, please, and only immediate family." Martha and Sarah went first, leaving Lily with a hospital volunteer who had agreed to watch Ranger. Robert looked smaller somehow in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines monitoring his vital signs, an IV delivering medication to his veins. But his eyes were open, and he managed a weak smile when he saw them. "Scared you, didn't I?" he whispered, his voice raspy from the intubation during surgery. "Just a little," Martha replied, taking his hand carefully around the IV lines. "Don't do it again." "No promises," he murmured, already drifting back toward sleep. Too stubborn to die anyway. The next 48 hours established a new pattern for the Thompson family. Martha refused to leave the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable recliner in Robert's room once he was moved from the ICU to a regular cardiac care bed. Sarah took Lily home each evening, returning in the morning with fresh clothes for Martha and updates on Ranger, who had been left in Eleanor's care at the farmhouse. The financial implications of Robert's heart attack loomed over them like a storm cloud. Their insurance would cover much of the hospital costs, but the deductibles, copays, and lost income from Robert's part-time jobs would strain their already precarious finances. Medicare covered the basics, but the specialized cardiac care program the doctors recommended would largely be out of pocket. "We'll figure it out," Sarah assured Martha when she voiced these concerns. "Maybe we can sell the farm." The suggestion, though practical, cut Martha to the quick. The farm had been their dream, their haven after David's death. The thought of losing it now felt like surrendering the last piece of the life they had built together. "Let's not make any decisions yet," she replied, unable to face that particular loss while Robert still lay pale and weakened in his hospital bed. It was on the 3rd day after Robert's heart attack that Collins appeared at the hospital, having heard the news from Eleanor. He arrived in civilian clothes rather than his uniform, looking oddly diminished without the military trappings that usually defined him. "Mrs. Thompson," he greeted Martha formally. "I came as soon as I could get leave. How is he?" Martha was touched by his concern. "Stable. They're talking about releasing him in a day or two, but the recovery will be long. Months of rehabilitation, special diet, medication. She trailed off, the enormity of the road ahead momentarily overwhelming her. Collins nodded understanding. Eleanor mentioned you might be facing some financial challenges, with both Lily's treatment and now this. Martha stiffened slightly, pride warring with practicality. We'll manage. I'm sure you will, Collins agreed, but I'd like to help, if you'll allow it. Before Martha could formulate a polite refusal, Collins continued. Not with money directly, but there's a program through the VA for former military personnel who served in Vietnam. Special cardiac care benefits that Robert might qualify for, given his service record. I've made some inquiries, pulled some strings. Martha stared at him, hope and suspicion mingling. Robert tried to get those benefits years ago. They said his condition wasn't service-related. Collins smiled slightly. Let's just say I know people who know people. The right forms filed with the right signatures can make a difference. He handed her a business card. This is the contact information for a VA benefits specialist who's expecting your call. They'll expedite Robert's application. Martha took the card, emotion tightening her throat. Why would you do this for us? After we... She couldn't finish the sentence. After you saved Ranger? Collins completed for her. After you gave him purpose and a home when he had neither. After your granddaughter gave him a reason to use his gifts when the military had written him off as worthless. He shook his head, a rueful smile touching his lips. Mrs. Thompson, I've been trying to repay a debt, not create one. What your family has done for Ranger, giving him a mission, a purpose, that's a gift beyond measure. This is the least I can do in return. Martha impulsively reached out to squeeze his arm, a gesture of gratitude beyond words. Collins accepted it with a nod, his military reserve softening momentarily. There's something else, he added. Something I've been meaning to tell you for a while now, about Ranger and how he ended up on that specific road where you found him. Martha tensed, sensing that whatever revelation was coming might shift her understanding of the events that had brought Ranger into their lives. When Ranger escaped from the transport taking him to be euthanized, he didn't just run randomly, Collins explained. He was tracking. Tracking what? Martha asked. Who? Collins corrected gently. Tracking who? Me. I'd been medically evacuated to Walter Reed, then transferred to a VA rehab facility in Virginia once I was stable. Ranger somehow picked up my scent trail, maybe from something I'd touched that was transported with me, maybe from people who had been in contact with me. Hard to say exactly. But knowing his training, his abilities, Collins shook his head in something like wonder. He was trying to find me, following whatever trace of me he could detect over hundreds of miles. Martha felt a chill run down her spine. But how did he end up on our road specifically? That seems like such a coincidence. Collins' expression grew solemn. I don't believe in coincidences, Mrs. Thompson. Not anymore. He hesitated, then continued. Did you know your son was in my unit? Not directly under my command, but adjacent. We crossed paths several times in Afghanistan. The revelation hit Martha like a physical blow. David? You knew David? Collins nodded. Not well, but yes. He was a good soldier, respected, and he talked about his family, showed pictures of his daughter, his parents' farm in Virginia. His gaze met Martha's directly. The same farm where Ranger found you. Martha sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Are you saying... I'm saying Ranger was following my scent, but somehow found the family of a soldier from our unit instead, Collins said quietly. Call it divine intervention, call it extraordinary coincidence, call it whatever you want, but I don't think it was random chance that brought him to you. The implications of Collins' words settled over Martha like a blanket. not smothering but somehow comforting, as if pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving suddenly locked into place. "David sent him to us," she whispered, the conviction in her voice surprising even herself. "To help Lily, to save her." Collins didn't confirm or deny this interpretation. "I just thought you should know," he said simply, "that there was a connection all along, even if we couldn't see it." Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse coming to check Robert's vitals, and Collins took the opportunity to excuse himself, promising to return soon to check on Robert's progress. Martha barely noticed his departure, her mind still reeling from the revelation that her son and Ranger had shared a connection long before the dog had appeared on that rainy country road. When she finally gathered herself enough to return to Robert's room, she found him awake and more alert than he had been since the surgery. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he observed, his voice stronger than before. Martha hesitated, unsure how much to share in his fragile state. "Collins was here," she said, deciding on a partial truth. "He's arranged for you to receive special VA cardiac benefits. Pulled some strings, apparently." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Military man using his connections to help us keep his dog. Seems fair." "It's more than that," Martha said, perching on the edge of his bed. "I think he genuinely cares what happens to us, to Lily especially. And—" she paused, still processing Collins's revelation. "And there's something else. Something about Ranger, about how he found us. It's complicated." "Life usually is," Robert replied with the pragmatism that had sustained him through war, grief, and now this health crisis. "Tell me later when my head's clearer. For now, just sit with me a while." Martha complied, taking his hand and settling into the familiar silence that had become the foundation of their nearly 50 years together. There would be time for revelations later, for piecing together the extraordinary sequence of events that had brought Ranger into their lives at precisely the moment they, and especially Lily, needed him most. For now, it was enough that Robert was recovering, that Lily's treatment was progressing well, that they had been granted a reprieve from the worst possibilities that had threatened their family. The road ahead would not be easy. Robert's recovery would be slow, Lily's treatment ongoing, their financial situation precarious despite Collins' assistance with the VA benefits. But they had weathered worse storms and emerged, if not unscathed, then at least intact. And they had Ranger, their unexpected guardian, their miracle in fur and loyalty, whose presence in their lives defied explanation, yet made perfect sense in the ways that mattered most. When Sarah arrived with Lily later that afternoon, the child immediately climbed carefully onto Robert's bed, mindful of his surgical site and the various tubes still attached to him. "Ranger says you're going to be okay, Grandpa," she informed him seriously. "But you have to rest and take your medicine and not work so hard anymore." Robert smiled, running a hand over her thinning hair, another casualty of her cancer treatment. "Is that what Ranger says? Is it? Well, I suppose I'd better listen then. He seems to know what he's talking about most of the time." Lily nodded solemnly. "He's very smart." "Sergeant Collins says he was the smartest dog in the whole army." "Speaking of Ranger," Martha said, suddenly realizing the dog wasn't with them. "Where is he?" "With Eleanor," Sarah explained. "She said she needed to do his checkup anyway, so she'd keep him while we visited. She'll bring him to the hospital tomorrow if they'll allow it. Apparently she has some pull with the hospital administration." Martha wasn't surprised. Eleanor seemed to have pulled in numerous unexpected quarters, a network of connections that extended far beyond what one would expect from a retired veterinarian in a small rural community. The next day brought Robert's release from the hospital, a complex affair involving prescriptions, follow-up appointments, dietary instructions, and strict limitations on physical activity. By the time they arrived back at the farmhouse, Robert insisting he felt well enough to recover there rather than at their suburban home, Martha was exhausted from the strain of managing it all. Eleanor was waiting for them, Ranger at her side. The dog's reaction to Robert's return was telling. He approached slowly, sniffing carefully at Robert's legs and hands, then gently rested his head against Robert's knee, as if understanding the man's weakened state. "He knows you're hurt," Eleanor observed. "These dogs can detect changes in body chemistry and breathing patterns. He'll probably be keeping a close eye on you for a while." Robert stroked Ranger's head with a shaky hand. "Seems I've got myself another nurse," he joked weakly. "Between Martha, Sarah, and this fellow, I'll be lucky if I'm allowed to go to the bathroom by myself." "You'll follow doctor's orders to the letter," Martha informed him firmly. "We've had enough scares in this family to last a lifetime." As Robert was settled in the downstairs guest room that had been hastily converted for his recovery, Martha found herself alone in the kitchen with Eleanor, the older woman preparing a heart-healthy meal while Martha organized Robert's numerous medications. "Collins told me," Martha said without preamble, "about David being in his unit, about how Ranger might have found us." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "I wondered when he would share that particular piece of the puzzle." "Did you know?" Martha asked, a hint of accusation in her tone. "All this time, did you know there was a connection?" Eleanor's weathered hands stilled on the vegetables she was chopping. "I suspected," she admitted. "When you mentioned your son had served in Afghanistan, when I saw the dates, it seemed too perfect to be coincidence. But I couldn't be certain until Michael confirmed it." "Why didn't you say something?" Eleanor resumed her chopping, the rhythmic sound filling the kitchen. "Would it have changed anything? Would knowing there was a connection have made Ranger's presence in your lives any more or less meaningful?" Martha considered this. "No," she finally admitted. "But it might have helped me understand why all of this happened the way it did." "Some things defy simple understanding," Eleanor said, her tone gentler now. "Some connections exist beyond our ability to explain them. Does it really matter how Ranger found you, or only that he did, at exactly the moment when Lily needed him most?" The question lingered in Martha's mind long after Eleanor had departed, leaving behind the prepared meal and a promise to return the next day. As she sat beside Robert's bed that evening, watching him sleep while Ranger maintained his vigilant position nearby, Martha found herself contemplating the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this point. David's deployment to Afghanistan, his death in a land far from home, Collins's near-fatal injury, and Ranger's desperate loyalty, the dog's incredible journey, somehow finding his way to the family of a soldier from his unit. His detection of Lily's cancer months before conventional medicine might have found it, and now his steady presence as Robert began the long road to recovery. Coincidence? Divine intervention? The mysterious workings of a world more connected than humans could comprehend? Perhaps, Martha decided as she watched Ranger rest his head protectively on Robert's bed, the explanation mattered less than the reality. Their lives had been forever changed by the arrival of this extraordinary dog. Whatever forces had guided him to them, she could only be grateful that he had found his way to their door on that rainy spring afternoon when they had needed him most, though they hadn't yet known how much. Outside the window, a gentle rain began to fall, not unlike the day they had found Ranger on the muddy country road. Martha watched the droplets trace patterns on the glass, feeling a strange sense of completion, as if a circle had closed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many, she knew, they would face them together, their family circle now including a remarkable dog who had crossed continents and defied death to find them. Some souls find each other across impossible distances, she thought, remembering the words that had come to her the day they found Ranger. Now, with Collins's revelation, those words seemed less poetic fancy and more simple truth, a truth embodied in the loyal dog who had somehow found his way from the battlefields of Afghanistan to the precise family who needed him most. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising to the Thompson family. Lily, now 13, stood tall and gangly at the edge of the farmhouse pond, her once thinning hair grown back thick and sun-streaked, her face animated as she called to Ranger. The German Shepherd moved more slowly these days, gray, liberally sprinkled through his muzzle, but his amber eyes remained alert and watchful as he padded to her side. "Good boy," she praised, kneeling to wrap her arms around his sturdy neck. "Best boy." Martha watched from the porch, a familiar tightness in her chest that was no longer solely from worry. These days, it was mingled with profound gratitude. 5 years, cancer-free. 5 years since the day Ranger had first alerted them to the silent threat growing inside Lily's small body. The doctors now used words like remission and cure with increasing confidence, though Martha had noticed Lily still instinctively reached for her neck whenever Ranger paid particular attention to that area. Some habits born of fear were slow to fade. Robert emerged from the farmhouse, moving carefully but steadily. His cardiac rehabilitation had been grueling but effective, his determination to regain his strength matched only by his willingness to finally accept the limitations of his aging body. He no longer took on heavy projects around the farm, having finally hired local help for the more strenuous tasks. It had been a concession to reality that the once fiercely independent man had struggled to accept. "Lily's got that dog doing her bidding again," he observed with a smile, settling into the rocking chair beside Martha's. "Don't know how she does it." "Military training or no, that animal acts like she hung the moon." "She did, as far as he's concerned," Martha replied, reaching across to squeeze her husband's hand. "They've got a connection none of us can quite understand." It was true. Over the years, Ranger's bond with Lily had only deepened, evolving as she grew from a fragile cancer patient to a thriving teenager with her father's adventurous spirit and her grandmother's artistic sensitivity. The dog had adapted seamlessly to each phase of her recovery, intuitively understanding when she needed protection and when she needed encouragement to push her boundaries. Their lives had found a new equilibrium in the years following Robert's heart attack. The VA benefits Collins had arranged had indeed come through, covering most of Robert's cardiac care costs. Sarah had settled permanently in Richmond, taking a supervisory position at the hospital that allowed her more regular hours. Lily split her time between her mother's apartment in the city during the school week and the farmhouse on weekends and holidays. And through it all, Ranger had remained their steady constant, the silent guardian whose presence reminded them daily of the remarkable chain of events that had brought him into their lives. "Michael's coming for dinner," Martha mentioned, using Colin's first name as they'd all begun to do as their relationship evolved from formal acquaintance to genuine friendship. "Said he has news." Robert nodded, unsurprised. Collins's visits had become regular occurrences over the years, the initial awkwardness giving way to a comfortable camaraderie born of shared experiences and mutual respect. He had never again mentioned taking Ranger back, though his pride in the dog's continued service was evident in every interaction. "Military retirement, I'd guess," Robert said. "He mentioned last time that he was considering it." 20 years is a long career, especially with his injuries." Martha nodded agreement. Though Collins rarely spoke of his wounds, she had noticed his occasional winces when the weather changed, the slight stiffness in his movements that mirrored Robert's own. The battlefield had marked them both, in ways both visible and invisible. The afternoon passed peacefully, Lily eventually bringing Ranger back to the porch where the dog settled at Robert's feet with a contented sigh. Martha had come to treasure these quiet moments, her family gathered, safe and whole despite all the forces that had threatened to tear them apart. Even in the face of cancer, heart disease, and grief, they had somehow found their way to this tranquil present. As promised, Collins arrived for dinner, his civilian clothes still bearing the crisp precision of his military background. He greeted them warmly, presenting Lily with a small, wrapped package. "Happy Cancerversary," he said with the easy affection that had developed between them. 5 years is a big milestone." Lily beamed, tearing into the package to reveal a delicate silver charm bracelet. A single charm dangled from it, a perfectly rendered miniature of a German shepherd. "It's beautiful," she exclaimed, immediately fastening it around her wrist. "Thanks, Michael." "There's room for more charms," Collins explained. "Thought you could add one for each year. Build your own story." Martha caught the symbolism immediately. Not just a piece of jewelry, but a tangible reminder of survival, of continued life and possibility. It was a thoughtful gift from a man who had once seemed capable only of military precision, not such emotional perception. Dinner was a lively affair, Sarah joining them after her hospital shift, bringing a celebratory cake decorated with the number 5 in bright blue icing. It was only after the meal, when Lily and Sarah had gone to feed the horses in the small stable Robert had built as a therapy project during his recovery, that Collins shared his news. "I'm retiring from active duty," he confirmed Robert's earlier prediction. 20 years and 3 combat tours is enough. Time to try something new." "Congratulations," Martha said sincerely. "Any plans for civilian life?" Collins nodded, a hint of excitement breaking through his typically reserved demeanor. "Actually, yes. I've been accepted to a master's program in veterinary science, specializing in canine behavior and training." "That's wonderful," Martha exclaimed. "You'll be excellent at it." "There's more," Collins continued, his gaze shifting to Ranger, who lay dozing at Robert's feet. "I've been consulting with a research team at Johns Hopkins. They're developing a training program for cancer detection dogs, based partly on Ranger's abilities. They've offered me a position once I complete my degree." Robert leaned forward, intrigued. "Cancer detection? Like what Ranger did for Lily?" Collins nodded. "Exactly. There's growing scientific evidence that certain dogs can be trained to detect cancer through scent with remarkable accuracy, sometimes before conventional tests can catch it. The military application I was involved with was just the beginning. Now they're looking at broader medical applications." "And they want you because of your experience with Ranger," Martha concluded. "Partly," Collins agreed, "but also because I proposed using retired military working dogs as the foundation for the program. Dogs like Ranger, who already have exceptional scent training and work ethic, but who need new purpose after their military service ends." The significance of this wasn't lost on Martha. How many military dogs might be saved from euthanasia or difficult transitions to civilian life through such a program? How many might find the same renewed purpose that Ranger had discovered with Lily? "It's like you're carrying on what Ranger started," she observed softly. Collins's expression grew contemplative. "In a way, though I've come to believe Ranger was just continuing what your son started." Martha felt the familiar tightness in her chest at the mention of David. Even after all these years, the loss remained a tender spot, though the sharp edges of grief had gradually softened. "What do you mean?" she asked. "David was known in our unit for finding purpose in seemingly random events," Collins explained. "He used to tell the newer soldiers that nothing was wasted if you found meaning in it. Even in Afghanistan, with all its chaos and senseless violence, he looked for purpose." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think Ranger finding his way to you, to Lily specifically, was somehow an extension of that belief. A way of continuing David's legacy of finding meaning in seeming randomness." The sentiment brought unexpected tears to Martha's eyes. It aligned so perfectly with her own feelings about Ranger's appearance in their lives. not coincidence, but connection. A thread linking her lost son to his daughter's survival through the extraordinary journey of a military working dog who had refused to abandon his mission. "I'd like to think that's true," she said simply. Later that evening, after Collins had departed and Sarah had taken a sleepy Lily back to Richmond, Martha and Robert sat on the porch in comfortable silence, Ranger stretched out between their chairs. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet darkness in familiar constellations. 5 years, Robert mused. Robert. Hard to believe. Martha knew he meant not just Lily's cancer-free milestone, but everything. The remarkable journey from that rainy afternoon when they'd found a wounded dog on a country road to this peaceful evening, their lives transformed in ways they could never have anticipated. "I was thinking about what Collins said," Martha said softly, "about Ranger continuing David's legacy, about finding purpose in randomness." Robert nodded, his profile silvered by moonlight. "Makes a certain kind of sense. David always did see connections the rest of us missed." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with shared understanding. After nearly 55 years of marriage, they had learned that some of their deepest communications required no words at all. The quiet was broken only by Ranger's soft sigh as he shifted position, his aging joints clearly bothering him more these days. Martha noticed how Robert's gaze lingered on the dog, concern evident in his expression. "He's getting old," Robert said, voicing what they had both been reluctantly acknowledging over recent months. "Large breed, military service, all he's been through. Eleanor says we've been lucky to have him this long." Martha nodded, her throat tight. Ranger had been with them for over 5 years now, and he had already been a mature dog when they found him. Eleanor estimated he was at least 11 or 12, elderly for his breed and especially considering his physically demanding military career. "He's slowing down," she agreed, "but his eyes are still bright. He still has good days." "More good than bad," Robert confirmed. "For now." The unspoken understanding hung between them, that Ranger's remaining time was limited, that they needed to prepare themselves and especially Lily for the inevitable loss. It would be hard for all of them, but for Lily particularly. The dog had been her constant companion through the darkest days of her young life, her protector and friend when her body had betrayed her and her future had seemed most uncertain. "We should talk to Sarah," Martha said. "Start preparing Lily, just a little. Not to frighten her, but so it's not a shock when—" She couldn't finish the sentence, emotion closing her throat unexpectedly. She had known from the beginning that Ranger would not be with them forever, had reminded herself repeatedly not to grow too attached to an aging dog with a difficult past. Yet somehow, despite these cautions, he had wound his way into her heart as surely as if he had been part of their family from puppyhood. Robert reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. "We've faced harder things," he reminded her gently, "and we'll face this too when the time comes." Together. Martha squeezed his hand in silent gratitude, watching as Ranger lifted his head at some distant sound, his ears pricked forward in the alert posture that had become so familiar. Even in his advancing age, he remained vigilant, protective, the guardian who had somehow found his way to them across impossible distances. The months that followed brought subtle changes to Ranger's condition. His morning stiffness lasted longer. He tired more quickly during his walks with Lily. The stairs to the second floor, once navigated with ease, became a challenge he increasingly avoided. Eleanor, now well into her 80s but still sharp-eyed and capable, examined him regularly, adjusting his medications and supplements to manage his arthritis and maintain his quality of life. "He's doing remarkably well, all things considered," she assured them. "Military dogs usually don't live this long, especially after what he's been through. I think having a purpose has kept him going far beyond what might have been expected." Purpose. The word echoed in Martha's mind, recalling Colin's observations about David, about finding meaning even in chaos. Had purpose literally extended Ranger's life? Had his devotion to Lily somehow granted him additional years beyond what might otherwise have been his span? Martha wasn't a fanciful woman by nature, but she had seen enough of Ranger's extraordinary abilities to believe almost anything was possible where he was concerned. When Lily graduated from middle school that spring, Ranger was there, wearing a special bandana Sarah had made for the occasion. He sat proudly beside the family during the ceremony, his posture still military straight despite his gray muzzle and slower gait. The principal, aware of Ranger's role in Lily's cancer journey, even mentioned him during her speech about overcoming adversity. A special mention for Lily Thompson's four-legged guardian who helped her through her battle with cancer. The summer that followed was unusually beautiful, with mild temperatures and just enough rain to keep the farm's vegetation lush without muddying the trails Lily and Ranger loved to explore. They spent long days outdoors, the teenage girl and her aging companion moving at a pace that accommodated Ranger's decreased stamina but still allowed for adventure. Martha captured these moments with her camera, creating a visual record of their bond. Ranger watching attentively as Lily painted at her easel by the pond, the pair napping together in the hammock strung between two old oak trees, Ranger patiently standing still as Lily placed a crown of wildflowers on his dignified head. "He seems happier lately," Robert observed one evening as they watched Lily brushing Ranger on the porch, the dog's eyes half closed in contentment. "More like his old self." Martha had noticed it too, a renewed vigor in the aging dog as if he had found a second wind. "Maybe the new medication Eleanor has him on is helping," she suggested, though something in her heart whispered a different explanation. It was on a perfect August morning, the air still cool from the night but promising warmth later, that Martha found Ranger lying unusually still on his bed in the corner of the kitchen. His eyes were open, watching her with the same intelligent awareness they had always held, but there was something different in his gaze, a certainty, a calmness that sent a chill of recognition through her body. "Robert," she called softly, not taking her eyes from Ranger. "Come here, please." Her husband appeared in the doorway, took one look at Ranger, and understood immediately. He crossed to kneel beside the dog's bed, his hand gentle on the graying head. "Hey, old soldier," he murmured. "Rough morning?" Ranger's tail thumped once against the cushion, a weak acknowledgment. When he tried to rise, his back legs refused to cooperate, remaining limp despite his evident determination. "I'll call Eleanor," Martha said, already reaching for the phone. The elderly veterinarian arrived within 30 minutes, her examination of Ranger thorough but gentle. "His back legs are paralyzed," she confirmed what they had already suspected. "Most likely a spinal stroke, common in aging larger breeds, especially those with his history of physical stress." "Can it be treated?" Martha asked, though she already knew the answer from Eleanor's solemn expression. "Not effectively, no. Not at his age, with his other health issues." Eleanor's weathered hand stroked Ranger's flank with professional tenderness. "He's not in pain right now, but he will be, very soon. And he won't recover the use of his legs." The implication was clear. The decision they had hoped to postpone now unavoidably before them. Martha looked to Robert, seeing her own grief reflected in his eyes. "Lily should have a chance to say goodbye," he said quietly. Eleanor nodded understanding. "I can make him comfortable for today, give him something for any pain. But don't wait too long. It wouldn't be kind." Sarah brought Lily to the farm as soon as school ended, having prepared her as gently as possible during the drive. The teenager's face was already tear-streaked when she burst through the door, making straight for Ranger's bed where Martha and Robert had been keeping vigil. "Ranger," she sobbed, dropping to her knees beside him. "Oh, Ranger." The dog's tail thumped weakly at her voice, his eyes brightening as she stroked his head and pressed her face against his fur. Even now he tried to comfort her, licking at her tears when she brought her face close to his. "I don't want him to go," Lily whispered, looking up at her grandparents with pleading eyes. "Please don't make him go." Martha knelt beside her, putting an arm around the girl's thin shoulders. "We don't want him to go either, sweetheart, but he's very sick, and he's not going to get better. The kindest thing we can do for him now is to let him go without suffering." "But he's my best friend," Lily protested, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "He saved my life." "Yes, he did," Martha agreed, her own voice thick with emotion. "And now we have to save him from pain. It's our turn to be brave for him, just like he was brave for you." Lily buried her face in Ranger's fur again, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The dog lay patient beneath her tears, his eyes moving between the humans gathered around him with a calm awareness that broke Martha's heart. "He knows," she thought, not for the first time. "He always knows." They spent the rest of the day with Ranger, reminiscing about his time with them, telling stories of his bravery and loyalty. Collins arrived in the late afternoon, having driven straight from his university classes when Sarah called him with the news. He knelt beside Ranger for a long moment, whispering something in the dog's ear that made his tail thump once in recognition. "He was the best of us," Collins said simply, rising to join the others. "The very best." As evening approached, Eleanor returned as promised. She spoke quietly with the adults while Lily remained at Ranger's side, unwilling to leave him even for a moment. "It's time," Eleanor said gently. "He's beginning to show signs of discomfort. It will only get worse from here." With heavy hearts, they prepared for the final goodbye. At Lily's insistence, they moved Ranger to the porch, where he had spent so many contented hours, watching over his family. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, a fitting tribute to the extraordinary dog who had changed all their lives. Eleanor explained the process carefully, ensuring Lily understood that Ranger would feel no pain, only a gentle sleep. "You can stay with him the whole time," she assured the tearful girl. "He'll know you're here." As Eleanor prepared the injection that would first sedate Ranger, Lily curled beside him on the porch floor, her arm around his neck, her face close to his ear. "You're the best dog in the whole world," she whispered. "The very best. I love you so much, Ranger. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for everything." Martha watched through her tears as Ranger's eyes remained fixed on Lily's face, his expression somehow conveying both love and reassurance. Even now, at the end, he was the protector, concerned more for his family's pain than his own. The sedative took effect quickly, Ranger's eyes growing heavy, his breathing slowing to a peaceful rhythm. Lily continued to stroke his head, murmuring words of love and gratitude that merged into a gentle litany of farewell. When Eleanor administered the final injection, Ranger slipped away so peacefully that it was hard to mark the exact moment of transition. One moment he was there, his presence filling the space around them as it always had. The next, he was gone, his body still but somehow diminished. The extraordinary spirit that had animated it departed. Lily's sobs broke the silence, raw and heartbroken. Sarah knelt to gather her daughter in her arms, her own tears falling freely. Robert stood with one hand on Colin's shoulder, both men stoic in their grief but unashamed of the moisture in their eyes. Martha found herself oddly calm, a strange peace settling over her despite the ache in her chest. She had known this day would come from the moment they found Ranger on that rainy country road, had known that loving him would inevitably lead to this moment of loss. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret a single moment of the journey that had brought them here. Later, after Ranger had been gently wrapped in his favorite blanket and laid to rest beneath the oak trees near the pond, After Lily had finally cried herself to sleep in the bedroom that had once been her father's, Martha found herself alone on the porch where Ranger had spent his final moments. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet darkness in familiar constellations. A gentle breeze carried the scent of late summer flowers and distant rain. Martha closed her eyes, allowing memories to wash over her. Ranger alerting them to Lily's cancer. Ranger helping Robert through his PTSD episodes. Ranger standing guard during Lily's treatments. Ranger somehow finding his way to them across impossible distances, guided by connections they might never fully understand. "Thank you," she whispered to the night air, to whatever forces had brought this extraordinary dog into their lives when they needed him most. "Thank you for sending him to us." A soft footfall on the porch steps made her open her eyes. Collins stood there, his face composed, but his eyes reflecting the same mix of grief and gratitude she felt in her own heart. "I keep thinking about something your son once said." He spoke quietly, settling into the chair beside hers. "We were pinned down, taking heavy fire. Situation looked hopeless. David looked around at all our frightened faces and said, 'This isn't the end of the story. This is just the hard part before it gets good again.'" Martha smiled through her tears, recognizing her son's unshakable optimism in those words. "That sounds like David." Collins nodded. "I think Ranger understood that too, somehow, that even the hardest chapters are just parts of a larger story, that what seems like an ending might actually be setting the stage for something new." Martha considered this, finding comfort in the perspective. "I hope Lily can see it that way eventually. Right now, she can only feel the loss." "She will," Collins assured her. "She has all of you to help her. And she has Ranger's legacy. Not just the years he gave her by finding her cancer, but the example he set of courage and loyalty. That's a gift that will stay with her forever." As if summoned by their conversation, Robert appeared in the doorway, his face tired but peaceful. "Lily's finally asleep," he reported, lowering himself carefully into the third chair. "Sarah's with her." The three of them sat in companionable silence, united in their grief but also in their gratitude for the remarkable dog who had touched all their lives. Whatever lay ahead, for Lily, for their family, for Collins and his new mission inspired by Ranger's abilities, they would face it with the lessons Ranger had taught them: courage in adversity, loyalty beyond measure, and the extraordinary healing power of unconditional love. In the distance, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the night sky, a fleeting reminder that even in darkness there is beauty to be found, connections to be made, stories yet to be written. Martha watched its arc with a heart both heavy and full, knowing that though Ranger was gone, the ripples of his remarkable life would continue to spread outward, touching lives in ways they might never fully comprehend. "Some souls find each other across impossible distances," she thought once more. "And some, like Ranger's, leave an indelible mark on the world even after they've departed from it." As we journey through our golden years, life reminds us that miracles often arrive in unexpected packages. Ranger's story speaks to all of us who've weathered loss, faced health battles, or struggled with purpose after retirement. Like Martha and Robert, many of us understand how an extraordinary connection, whether with a loyal pet, a grandchild, or even a stranger who becomes family, can heal wounds we thought would never close. The German Shepherd who found his way across impossible distances reminds us that even in our 60s, life still holds remarkable chapters waiting to be written. When retirement feels empty, when health scares rattle our foundations, when we miss those we've lost, remember that purpose and connection can find us in our darkest moments, often through the most unexpected channels. What guides us through isn't just resilience, but the web of relationships that sustain us when we can no longer stand alone. Have you experienced an unexpected guardian angel in your life that appeared just when you needed them most? How has an animal companion helped you through difficult times? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what another heart needs to hear today.